Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning. As I always say, wherever you are, if you're under the sound of this voice, you have my deepest appreciation for being under the sound of this voice. These lights are a little too heavy. There we are. That's fine. We'll go with that. Yeah, wherever you are, anywhere in the world, whether you're on the East Coast, West Coast, whether you're in a foreign country, wherever you are, if you can hear this voice, if you have your coffee or whatever you're drinking handy, and you are listening to the show, you have my deepest appreciation for being here. There is a lot of news, especially a lot of stuff that was taking place in Ukraine. Um, in fact, that's where we should start. Mark is going to be here at 7:15 in order to further the discussion. But long story short, Russia has gone on a destruction of, let's say, power spree. And what I mean by that, the lights are out across Ukraine. They're rolling blackouts in various cities in Ukraine. Zelensky was in the middle of an interview where the lights went out in the middle of the interview. There's that level of humiliation. But for all intents and purposes, things are not going well. You have cauldrons that are effectively going on in Seversk. There's fighting in the middle of Seversk, Kupiansk, and Pokrovsk. Those are in Russian hands at this point. They have not called it, but for all intents and purposes, these are mop-up operations that are effectively left over. Mark can confirm that when I talk to Mark. And you get a Ukrainian military that is under withering assault. The attack that Russia launched the last day or so, they're calling it one of the strongest of the war. Now, this keeps happening every month or so. They would say this is the strongest of the war. But this one specifically went after the energy grid and effectively knocked out all of the thermal plants in Ukraine. And so the idea of what's going to take place during the winter, well, I guess it's already winter, or at the very least, we're heading into winter. Unknown. Are there going to be lights? Well, it seems like they're going to be rolling blackouts. And the people who are in charge of this pointed out, we're out of spare parts. This is not going to be easy to fix. This is not a situation of winning. Ukraine seems to be going bankrupt at this point. The European Union is doing everything in their power to get their hands on the Russian funds. Belgium is holding out, effectively saying, we are not going to take the hit for Europe, meaning we are not going to take the economic damage and the consequences of you stealing, which is what it is, stealing hundreds of billions of dollars from the Russians. We're not doing it. Now, Europe has already said this will be economically devastating if indeed they don't do it, but Belgium at this point has not budged. Will they budge? It is a belief for many Russian analysts that at some point Europe will get their hands on the money. Up to this point, they have not been able to do so. And trying to find a replacement for hundreds of billions of dollars in bankrupt economies, not so much. Germany is in economic turmoil, obviously. We've talked about this a few times before, meaning the beating heart of Europe is taking a beating. None of these things are success. All of these things are failings. The other thing that has taken place is Sergei Lavrov. So there has been a lot of, let's say, hoopla in Western media that Sergei Lavrov and Putin were somehow at odds, that Putin was mad at Lavrov, and that Putin was mad at Lavrov, so Putin didn't invite Lavrov to the meetings that he was having with his generals. Okay. Lavrov has given an interview, and in that interview, Lavrov has pointed something out that I have pointed out, that the Trump administration offered a deal. I've said it before, but Lavrov was more explicit. The Trump administration sent Wickoff to offer a deal. The Russians, I would imagine with modest modifications, Putin went to Alaska and accepted that deal. And the next thing the Russians know is that Trump, using Ukraine as a hand to do so, initiated a war on Russian energy. This includes going after India. This includes shaking his fist at China, but he really didn't bring it up when he had the opportunity to talk to Xi Jinping about it. But long story short, there was no response, or at the very least, the response was effectively an escalation of the war. Now, if you have noticed, Donald Trump has backtracked. In Alaska, him and Putin came out. Both of them sounded like there was a deal on the table. Trump turned around and then, after saying, look, we need to get to the root cause of this. A ceasefire is not going to do it. We need to settle the war. Has now backtracked to the original position of, we need a ceasefire. Okay. The Russians have proceeded to accomplish their objectives militarily. The problem for Ukrainians is that for all of the people who are saying, and I guess I've been caught saying this myself, making this argument that, well, the Russians need to speed up. They need to be more aggressive. They need to do this. They need to do that. The reality of it is Europe has been taking a beating over the course of the time this war has been taking place. Ukraine has been taking a beating over the time this war has been taking place. And despite all of the annoyances that have come in the way of Russia being, let's say, a bit self-effacing in dealing with Donald Trump, nothing's changed on the battlefield. I'm sorry. What has changed on the battlefield is the pace at which the Russian military is advancing. That has changed. But that is more so because a war of attrition has started to come to fruition. The rhyme wasn't anticipated, but I'll go with it. A war of attrition has started to come to fruition. And what that means is, as Pokrovsk is falling, as Seversk is falling, as Kupiansk is falling, meaning as these cities fall one after another, where it seems like there's going to be like 4 or 5 that falls back to back to back, leaving Kramatorsk as being the last city standing, at the very least in the context of the Donbass. The speed at which the Russian events is taking place is increasing. So for the people saying Russia needs to speed up and Russia needs to get this over with, I don't know how Ukraine replaces 40,000 troops a month. I don't know how they deal with the bankruptcy issue. I don't know how they deal with the weapons issue. One of the reports that came out is with the government shutdown, Ukraine has been getting, and Europe has been getting no weapons or anything else because the government has been shut down. All of these are issues that don't seem to have a solution. And you can see it on the battlefield as the Ukrainian military seems to be withering away and getting worse and worse. I've heard of no counteroffensive. I've heard of no counterattacks. I've heard of nothing where the Ukrainians have the capability of running any kind of major offensive operations or anything like that. It seems like they're just being ground into dust. And the Trump administration at this point hasn't said much about it, maybe because its focus is on Venezuela, maybe because its focus is on the government shutdown. The Europeans, of course, complain, but ultimately, what can they do? So you have a Ukrainian military that is being ground down. You have a Ukrainian country that is in the dark at this point, or at the very least large parts of it in the dark, with large rolling blackouts. Some of the rolling blackouts going for 3 hours a day, others going for 2 hours a day. But needless to say, this is not a recipe for success. Oh, Lavrov. There was all of this talk that Putin was mad at Lavrov. Okay, that's not the case. There was this other idea that the reason that Lavrov wasn't in the meetings is because they were worried about the decapitation strike, and they at the very least wanted one of their senior diplomats to be out of, let's say, out of range, if anything did happen like that. I don't know if that's true. Meaning, the West has a tendency to talk to itself. And in the capacity of talking to itself, it comes up with all sorts of ideas and all sorts of beliefs and everything else, untethered to what's actually taking place. I don't know. If the Russians were worried about a decapitation strike, it gets across the devolvement of any notion of negotiations that seemingly, quote unquote, were taking place. Obviously, the Russians want a deal. Part and parcel to the reason that they are making this argument of, hey, we're sticking with the Alaska format, and we're waiting for the Trump administration to give us a yay or nay in the context of what we are discussing. Now, obviously, I would argue the Trump administration has answered that by waging an energy war and talking about tomahawks. There's your answer, sir. But they are so stick-to-itive to this point of, we want a deal. They are still leaving this door open, saying, hey, there's a door. When you get tired of these people dying, the door is open. That is the way they're effectively dealing with it. The consummate diplomat. As I made the argument before, they're chasing safety. And I know the West doesn't look at it in those terms, but I think that's what it is. I think from Putin's perspective, he has internalized this idea that his job is to make Russia safe. And I know you can say, well, wait a minute, he's brought Russia into a war. Yeah, because standing still and doing nothing was radically unsafe. And if indeed they can get some kind of deal that lasts for a decade, 5 years, maybe longer. And I'm saying that with this idea of, if you've internalized every bit as much as Zelensky has internalized himself as an actor playing a president in a war, but in this case, an actual president that is actually looking at his country and is trying to figure out, how do I make this country safe? They are continuously pressing on our borders. They are continuously going after us. This needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. And I'm going to do this on my watch. A deal, from their point of view, gets them closer to that, or at the very least, decisively winning the war gets them closer to that. And I would wager that they're willing to accept either one of those prospects. So it's interesting. A lot of stuff is taking place right now in the context of Ukraine. What time is it? Okay, Mark is going to be on almost in any moment. And there is a lot to talk to him about. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? We talked about the Witkoff deal. We talked about the Cauldron Severus. We talked about mopping up operations in Pokrovsk, Kupiansk. We talked about Zelensky doing an interview going dark. There was that. That was wild. We talked about blackouts. We talked about thermal plants. We talked about Putin mad at Lavrov, which is wild to me. That was really the argument that they were making. Putin seems to be mad at Lavrov. He's not in the meeting. It's like, okay, dude, just because somebody's not in the meeting doesn't necessarily mean that they're mad. Calm down. I still say there is no feedback mechanism to Ukraine. What is the incentive? I mean, maybe the incentive is, okay, NATO and the US looks bad. That is an incentive, I guess. And if you can come to some kind of deal or agreement, you can put lipstick and makeup on a pig. Maybe. But a stronger feedback mechanism is US troops coming back in flag-draped coffins, European troops coming back in flag-draped coffins. That at the very least as a public that gets more engaged. I don't know if the public cares, short of intellectually caring about it. And the same thing for Europe. I don't think Europeans want to end up in a larger war. Oh, Stoltenberg pointed out that, yeah, I know the incentives in regards to their economy and everything else. That's fair. But the European leaders aren't necessarily acknowledging that the war is affecting their economies, even though the Europeans on the ground, hopefully, at the very least, the non-liberals will probably know that. Jens Stoltenberg came out with a statement. Mark is here, so let's go to Mark. We are joined with the man, the legend, best in the business, Mark Sleboda. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Jamarl, I'm alive. How the hell are you? Thanks for having me. I'm doing all right. Always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always an honor and pleasure to have you, man. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can check Mark on his YouTube channel, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda. You can also check him out on Boosty, Boosty, under the same name, Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda. Or if you put in Mark Sleboda, he will appear. He has damn good videos on both. So yeah, Mark, always appreciate having you, man. Mark, I guess there are a few stories. Let's start with Lavrov. And we can move on to the power plants and everything else. Lavrov wasn't at, I guess it was a couple of meetings that Putin was at. And of course, there was a lot of
one meeting
conversation. Oh, okay.
One meeting.
Okay, one meeting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the talk in the West was that Putin was angry at Lavrov. There was that. The talk was that the Russians were concerned about a decapitation strike, in which case they kept Lavrov out of the meeting. There was that. What was the reality for this? I mean, Lavrov just gave an interview that kind of pushed all that to the side. I don't even know why those things were brought up as part of the discussion. But what was going on with that? Was there any conversation about why he wasn't at the meeting?
Yeah, there has not been any. Lavrov was not asked by the journalist during an extensive interview he has given since then. He spoke at length, but he was not asked and did not speak about that. However, there is enough chatter in the Russian media and the Russian Telegram space that I think it's pretty easy to fit together what it's happened. And it's not because of some type of political marriage spat between Putin and Lavrov. I know those are the kind of things that the West hopes for and feels free to thus then speculate on, as they've done repeatedly over, well, time immemorial, really. They don't have an idea what's really happening, But let's be honest that Kremlinology has never been a scientific skill for the Western mainstream media analysis, and it is more of hokum, tea reading and prognostication and of that kind of sort that has very little to do with reality. There was any indication beforehand. So the meeting in question was a meeting of the Russian National Security Council. And the Russian National Security Council is pretty much the premier decision-making political body in Russia. Absolutely on foreign and military policy, and increasingly on domestic policy, right? All of the politically, institutionally most powerful people in Russia are on the select list of that Security Council. Now, it doesn't always meet with the same members because depending on the topic suggested, some members may not be needed, right? And on others, more expansive. And the meeting in question, I think it's fair to say, this is a modern Russian reincarnation of the Politburo. That's what it is. I mean, it's not a stretch to claim that. They meet in the same room where the Politburo used to meet, right? If that's not signal setting. And again, it's not. The West likes to imagine, particularly the Western media, likes to imagine that Putin is some kind of dictator and makes absolute decisions that are then carried out, and it's not true. Putin is certainly, due to his position and due to his abilities, first among equals, right, of Russia's decision makers within their political system. But his most valuable political skill that has kept him in power this long is that he effectively manages Russia's political decision makers. He adjudicates between them. He reaches an equanimity between them. And that is the function that he serves. Right. And this was a very expansive meeting of the Russian National Security Council. We got to see some members of the Security Council that we haven't seen in a long time, like Sergei Ivanov, who was once Putin's top security advisor, equivalent to you could say a U.S. national security advisor. And Sergei Ivanov was once, I think, definitely on the short list to replace Putin. He also a former Russian intelligence, also out of the FSB. They were very, I think, like-minded individuals. But Sergei Ivanov, I think, legitimately had, shall we say, what is often referred to in the Western media as he retired for family issues, right? Something of that sort. But that's actually literally the case, as he had his sons die in an accident, and he, I think, legitimately wanted, to retire actively, but he still maintained his position on the National Security Council. Evidently, I did not know that. I think many others didn't. He's still obviously a powerful figure, and he was there for this, right? So again, very expansive, and practically everyone else was there except noticeably Sergei Lavrov. And the question arises, why was he not there? And it wasn't because of some, political marriage spat between Putin and Lavrov, as has, I think, been pretty conclusively cleared up due to Lavrov's extensive interview on TV since then, right? Where he talked at length about, foreign policy and other things, and obviously has no degradation of his position as foreign minister, and only signaled, unanimity within the Kremlin on these issues, whatever the West might wish to hope otherwise. But the conjecture within Russia is that he was not there as the equivalent of what happens during the U.S. State of the Union address, when one particular government official, selected by a rotation, is not invited, is left out of the meeting, so that if there was an attack on the room where they were meeting, that there was a chain of succession, right? For someone within the government to pick up the pieces and respond.
Right.
So Russia's official presidential chain of succession is not as lengthy or as elaborate as the American one. Officially, if something happens to the president, it is the chairman of the Duma who accedes to that position. He becomes the acting president until elections are held, right? So in that case, the prime minister, the head of the speaker of the Russian Federation Council. So it would be Mishustin, the Russian prime minister, who would become the president. This very quiet, very professional, very skillful technocrat, because that's what Mishustin is. But unofficially, I believe that there is another chain of succession in the case of some type of decapitation strike against the Russian leadership, which we know Trump loves decapitation strikes through his terms of office.
So the Russians were concerned about that. I mean, so that is real.
Yeah, that seems like it's a real thing now, right? We know that the Kiev regime, acting as a proxy for the West, has attempted to assassinate Putin multiple times because they told us so. I mean, they didn't even sugarcoat it. They didn't even lie to it. The Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, right, the sociopathic Kyrylo, I like the dark Budanov, openly admitted, we've tried to kill him multiple times. We just haven't succeeded yet, right? So I think it is reflective, right, and a direct symptom of how high the geopolitical tensions are right now between the U.S. and Russia, between the West and Russia, that has to be taken into account by the Russian leadership in such a significant way, because this was a meeting that was bringing together so many of the important decision makers of Russia, who were talking, among other things, about the necessity of responding in kind if the U.S., as
Okay,
Trump
yes.
seemed to indicate, would resume nuclear testing, right?
Right.
I mean, not testing launch vehicles like Russia has done with the Burovesnik and the Poseidon and the, a test of their strategic forces, and the U.S. just actually tested their own Minutemen, ICBMs, and so forth. This meaning Trump seemed to indicate, and he wasn't clear, exactly if he meant what everyone believed he meant on this, was to start detonating nuclear weapons again. And to be clear, neither the US nor Russia has tested a nuclear weapon, that is, detonated a nuclear warhead, since the early 1990s, right?
Yeah.
So for decades, right? Everything is done with mathematical subcritical models. China hasn't since 96, I believe. The only one who has is one test by North Korea. But Trump made this weird statement where, because Russia and China had done nuclear testing, he said the U.S. would have had no option, but he was ordering the resumption of nuclear testing. And this caused a great deal of concern in the Kremlin and in China and elsewhere around the world, because this would, really fire off the gun, at least in terms of officiating what has really already become a new nuclear arms race, a much more dangerous nuclear arms race than the first one, I would say. First of all, because we have already been in a qualitative nuclear arms race since the early 2000s, since the U.S. unilaterally pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty, because they wanted to put missile defense, right, ringing Russia and China and other countries. And why? So that they could nullify Russia's and China's strategic deterrent, right? Why? Because the idea then would, of course, allow them to make a nuclear first strike, with the belief that between that strike and then their own defense, that they could survive whatever was to follow. All right. Obviously, Russia and China are not comfortable with not having a strategic deterrent against the U.S. using their own nuclear weapons on them. So Putin made this clear in multiple speeches, including at Munich in 2007, that at the Munich Security Conference, that if the West goes down this path, then and it starts erecting missile defense in Europe, whatever they said, the nonsense they said at the time about Iran or whatever, Russia never paid any attention to, rightly so, as has been admitted since then. But that Russia would have to then develop missile technology that would not be subject to Western missile defense. Now, Western missile defense never really accomplished, or certainly up to this day, has not accomplished anywhere near the ability, the success rate that, is the potential, right? The threat of missile defense. It just hasn't worked out. The Americans aren't that good at it, right? The Patriot system, not all that it's rocked up to be. The THAAD system as well. There's only a handful of existing systems. And again, the interceptor production is a big problem. But Russia, had no way of knowing that, or, nor should it be counted into their decisions, and went about developing a number of missile, delivery system technologies such that they would not be subject to any existing or future U.S. missile defense shield. And the results of that were Russia's hypersonic weapons, right? The Kinjal, the Zircon, the Oreshnik, right? But also Russia's new, more exotic nuclear-powered delivery systems, the Burovesnik nuclear-powered cruise missile, and the Poseidon nuclear-powered UUV, unmanned underwater vehicle, right? That was the direct result, and that has come out. And that has brought us to this moment that a lot of people don't realize where we're at of geopolitical tension, right? Because the U.S. has no answer to these weapons. They're calling Russia's development of these weapons, and they're at a very public announcement now, as destabilizing to the existing nuclear, system, right? The presumed position of parity. That's not how Russia sees it at all. They see that system was already destabilized by the U.S. pulling out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and getting rid of the entirety of the rest of the Western arms control architecture, right?
Yeah.
With the last piece of it, the New START treaty, to expire in February of next year, and giving no indication that it intends to renew it. And the New START treaty is the last, again, it's the last piece of the Cold War security architecture that the U.S. hasn't pulled out of. Russia has actually suspended at least the inspection part of its mechanism already, because the U.S. was obviously using it to help the Kiev regime target Russia's nuclear triad. But if the New START treaty goes away, we're not only in a qualitative arms race, we're then have the potential to restart a quantitative, because that is the treaty that limits the amount of nuclear warheads and launch vehicles, ICBMs, bombers, on both sides, and has for decades now. The U.S. no longer feels it should be bound by any bilateral treaties with Russia because China, right? And then Russia's like, well, I mean, we've never felt, uncomfortable because the United Kingdom and France are not a part of these treaties, and they're on your side. What does this have to do with anything? But anyway, that's the position. So all of these factors going together at the same time, right? First of all, the whole big context is the conflict in Ukraine, right? But then specifically, there are all of these literal nuclear war tensions arising. Russia's, coming to actual deployment of all these weapon systems that were meant to compensate for the U.S. Putting up missile defense in Europe against Russia, pulling out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty and putting them up. Then the U.S. dissolving all the rest of the Cold War security architecture, and now not renewing the New START treaty, and the U.S. announcing the resumption of nuclear testing. This, from the Russian point of view, sounds like a Cuban Missile Crisis moment, right? Or potentially much more so. Because of the whole context of the conflict in Ukraine, where literally the U.S. has been firing missiles under the thin pretext of a Kiev proxy into Russia. So it's a very dangerous situation as far as the Russians go. And I think there is enough indication, if the pronouncements of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, that there is all kinds of either intended or attempted dirty trick, false flag operations going on, that the West is cooking up all the time, and Russian intelligence is uncovering and making public and hopefully averting them one by one. The most recent, last week, the SVR announced of a Western and Kiev regime plan or potential plan to, it's actually a familiar one, at least to me, to cause some type of nuclear accident at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant that would theoretically, cause the largest nuclear power plant in Europe to go critical, and then create a nuclear catastrophe. And again, the idea is the West is losing a proxy conflict that has the potential of altering, the world order,
Yes.
of being seen as a complete defeat of the U.S.-led Western global hegemony and having all kinds of geopolitical repercussions because of that, and they cannot allow that. So they've got to get out of that box. And this type of shock situation, right, along the lines of Naomi Klein's very good, whatever else she's done, Shock Doctrine, the book, that would create a situation where the rules of the game would change, and potentially the idea is force Russia to freeze the conflict, right, at least along the current lines. Now Russia hopes that doesn't happen. And there's also the question, they had the big question, well, how do we successfully pin it on Russia then? Right? That was the big problem they were having. And it has to be said that the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant has long been in, with all of its reactors, in cold shutdown, which
Poses
how
a
would
problem.
they then create that situation, right? I mean, it still requires cooling water, yes, but even then, it wouldn't lead to a Chernobyl type situation,
Right.
right? It would be difficult to imagine how they would go about creating that. But anyway, there's constantly warnings by Russian intelligence of this type of asymmetric warfare, unconventional warfare, hybrid warfare, whatever you want to call it, plots that are being cooked up by the West, and the SVR is, sussing them out, as is their job, and calling them out, and hopefully that is then preventing them from being enacted. We could hope, but again, that is all the context of this heightened sense of geopolitical tension right now, where Russia feels compelled to leave a minister out of an important national security council meeting because they feel that they could be targeted by Kiev and thus the West, because the Kiev regime doesn't do anything that's not, as a puppet for the U.S. and the West in this, whatever pretext of playing some type of mediator, between the two warring sides that Russia has allowed Trump to assume the fiction of right now, but doesn't actually take seriously.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Lavrov pointed out something that seemed to be apparent to me at the Alaska summit. When Putin and Trump came out, they acted as if there was a deal on the table. Lavrov seems to indicate that there was a deal on the table, that Putin...
No, I think that is too strong a word. I know some people in the alt media are using that. The word that Lavrov has used is an understanding. That is not a deal. That is, we talked about something, right? We threw it around. It's a potential. That is not a deal, right? I.e. something that is written down and waiting to be signed, right? So what Russia has suggested is that the U.S. made a proposal, an informal, shall we say, ballpark figure proposal for not really a settlement of the conflict, but a freezing of the conflict with pending other diplomatic activity to come to a permanent settlement of the conflict that Russia felt they could suggest. And that supposedly, according to some things that have come out of the Western media, and that at the very least what Lavrov and others have intimated at, does not preclude that Russia may have agreed to a freezing of the conflict in the south, in the Zaporozhye and Kherson region, and presumably Dnipropetrovsk as well, if the Kiev regime completely withdrew all of its military forces from the remainder that they still hold in the Donbass, right? That is the presumption of the understanding that was at least the first step, right, in a process. But there was no deal. There was nothing signed. Supposedly, the story goes, is that this is what lured, what convinced Putin to come to Alaska when he had always been against, had been keeping Trump, who was desperate for a face-on-face meeting because he has this belief that, he's such a whatever, such a mensch that he can, talk anyone into anything, blah, 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 through sheer force of his charisma, if he can just sit down with them face to face. And Russia views this whole thing as, the highest of geopolitical level talks at the highest level that need to be codified down in absolute, documented, signed detail, as in the Cold War architecture that was established between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the first Cold War. So they have completely where Trump thinks everything can be done with a suggestion, a handshake, and around the Gulf or something like that, to seal the deal. But the idea that was supposedly what brought Putin to Alaska, right? And that Russia supposedly said, all right, that's an interesting proposal. If that's the direction that we're moving, we can talk, right? We can talk. But I don't think things actually went well in Alaska at all. And those people who have suggested that it did, and that Russia left with a feeling that everything was settled and there was a deal on the table, I think are reading things that they want to see into it and exaggerating the sense. They're completely ignoring the fact that the summit was called off an entire day early. In fact, they left without even having luncheon, and they had no joint statements to the press as had previously. I mean, questions from the press. They did both make a statement, and it was clear to me in that statement that Trump was very much not happy. He was very much not energetic. He was very not much the Trump who had just gotten closer to signing or ending the conflict in Ukraine, about which he has made such a personal thing about. The idea that things went well at Alaska because of some potential deal just does not square with these facts of the way that the meeting ended or of what has happened since then. So I don't believe it, right? Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily a row, but I think the whole meeting was at still at cross purposes, and whatever Trump may have suggested, it's been referred to as the Witkoff plan, without any firm indication, simply because Witkoff maybe delivered it to Putin. Right. But as far as the discussions about it, if that's what happened at Alaska goes, I don't think they actually went very well. And since then, everything, but it must be said that Russia, Lavrov and Putin and others have made continual veiled reference to Alaska, this understanding that we reached at Alaska. Right. And obviously, whatever that understanding was that the Russians did walk away from that meeting has been completely ignored from the United States from as soon as that meeting ended. And the Russians feel peeved about it, right? I think they're actually whining about it, to be perfectly honest.
Wait, so what's the word again? You say you think they're actually what about it?
Peeved, that they're unhappy about it.
But there was another word you used, whining?
Whining. They're whining.
Whining about it. Well, Lavrov keeps bringing it up.
We had a deal. We had an understanding, and you're walking back on it. I mean, which to me is just like, if you ever think you had an understanding with Trump and the United States that would end this conflict, right, on anything less than complete American terms, right, American dictated terms preferential to the U.S. and the Kiev regime, then you were naive. And I think they are.
You really? Okay.
I
mean,
think
Lavrov keeps bringing it up. He brings it
I
up all the
keep
time.
bringing it up, and I'm like, obviously the U.S. isn't interested in whatever understanding that you think that you had, and probably never was. So get back to the war.
Well, that's the other part.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, why keep publicly whining about it? What is that going to do? And the fact that they do, to me, is kind of desperate. Like, oh, we were so hoping, and to me, it was never a possibility. And if they thought that it was, well, then they were wrong.
Okay, well, this is confusing to me because two things seem to be happening at once.
Yes.
Lavrov continues to bring up, I don't take the Russians as being naive. At the very least, if they're still naive,
they were certainly in Minsk.
Well, right, but that's
2014 and 2015, and for the 8 years that led up to that, and Putin has admitted that was a mistake. So,
agreed.
Don't suggest that the Kremlin can't be naive, because Putin has a natural desire to resolve things with as little conflict as possible. It is
Let me explain what I mean.
Base position.
I just mean after Minsk, after the Istanbul agreements, after seeing Donald Trump lie to Iran, after seeing Donald Trump lie in Gaza, after you've looked at the person who you're effectively dealing with, it would be shocking to me if you're naive about the character of this person.
I'm going to say once again, right? I know Frank Herbert in the Dune books said that fear is the mind killer.
Yes.
But I'm going to stand by my reversion of that hope is the mind killer.
So you think they're just hoping for a deal? See, from my point of view, they're chasing safety. And if Putin thinks
there is that, but sometimes you're just not going to get safety.
Yeah, that's fair.
That caution is not going, and an overabundance of caution is not going to do you well. And
Mark,
I think
it'll be greatly disappointing if they're that naive. And I'm just saying it would be disappointing. I mean, Lavrov, I agree with you. Lavrov is continually talking.
You've grown up in the same era I have, right? You remember all those Charlie Brown cartoons.
The football.
Lucy is sitting out there with the football, right?
Yeah.
And every time Charlie Brown says, "No, I'm not going to play that game again," right? I know what you're going to do. And she says, No, for real this time. And then he always gets suckered into it. And runs up, and at the last minute, she pulls the ball away again, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Fair enough. Like you said, hope springs eternal.
Yeah, like a plague it does. Like a plague it does.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, okay, good. I'm glad you cleared that up, because that was confusing to me. Because to me, it sounded like two things were happening.
That's my take. Other people I know have other takes, and that, I believe, is premised on their argument from Alaska, that everything at Alaska was great and there was some kind of deal and the conflict was about to end. And I never got that reading out of Alaska at all.
Yeah.
So,
well, Russia's still continuing on the battlefield, and
yes,
it seems
that at least has not changed. That whatever diplomatic games are going on, I am comforted by the fact that the Kremlin that Putin, shall we say, has not allowed this political process to interfere with the military process, at least as far as we can tell up until this point. And then I don't mind the political game so much. The whining is a little grating, but other than that, I'm not too discomforted by it.
Taking down all the thermal plants in Ukraine, apparently. That's according to Ukrainian officials who are dealing with it. Ukraine doesn't seem...
Okay, so there's, from the pronouncements that have come out by the Ukraine, all of the plants are down, but some of them may have been shut down. That is not clear. Some of them have been targeted and destroyed. That
Oh,
we know because I've seen the video evidence of it. Did they destroy them all, or were some of them shut down as part of a precautionary measure? That I don't know. It could be that all of them were destroyed, right?
yeah.
But because Russia did make significant ballistic missile attacks targeting thermal plants, as well as targeting 750 kilovolt stations that run to the Kiev regime's remaining 3 small nuclear power plants in West Ukraine, which they did not target the nuclear plant, but they targeted the substations that then lead up to that plant, right? Which would have, if the damage is not repaired, might eventually force the Kiev regime to shut down those reactors, right? Because they could not, much like they have forced Russia to do with the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, out of caution, right? Because there is a question of maintaining the electricity supply to the cooling pumps for the reactors. Then that led Russia to, and the danger of the plant being targeted itself, right. They shut down completely the largest nuclear power plant in Europe rather than use it. And they're attempting to basically just replicate what the Kiev regime did with the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, with the 3 remaining much smaller nuclear power plants that the Kiev regime has in West Ukraine. But we do know that I don't know about the biggest attack. It maybe was the biggest attack on power generative facilities, right? Because from what I've seen, the numbers are some 400 and some missiles and drones, right, lumped together, which has never been a very useful number for me because it doesn't, without delineating how many were missiles and how many drones. Yeah, there's a big difference there. But regardless, 400 and some is definitely not the biggest attack, right? We've seen numbers lumped together of 800, right? And so forth. But I've seen some other trying to say that this was maybe the biggest in terms of ballistic, specifically ballistic, meaning Iskander missiles fired. And they were particularly what was used to target thermal power plants. But we know some of them were destroyed. We don't know that all of them were destroyed yet. Right. Okay. So it's just the wording. I'm looking at the wording that the officials are using, and the Kiev regime's officials are using, and they were not saying that all of the plants were destroyed. They were saying that all the plants are down. And previously, they have shut down some generative facilities during an attack, hoping to avert strikes, or at least Russia to make the assessment that those plants were down as a result of a strike, but they really weren't, and they were continuing providing power and so forth. So we need to wait a few days to get for the Russia to do a proper damage assessment before we know how many of those plants were completely destroyed and how many either weren't hit or were hit but not completely destroyed and shut down on their own instead otherwise. But right now, I think the important thing, at least for the time being, is that Ukraine is black. The lights are out for the most part across nearly the entirety of Ukraine, right? There's, of course, all kinds of knock-ons with that. Like in large areas, running water is also down. Why? Because running water, is pumps that are powered by electricity, right? So there's a whole host of life-sustaining infrastructure associated with just electrical power that is down as well. But it also means that the Kiev regime's train logistics are down because most of their trains, they do have some diesel ones, but most of their trains are powered by electricity. It means that whatever remnant military industrial complex and underground workshops that they have is also down, right? Because they're not able to power that for any length of time off of emergency generators or the like. So there is the necessity. Now, there's a great deal of whining and outrage about this whole targeting of the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure that is going on in the Western media, completely ignoring that every time the U.S. and the West goes to war, they have targeted their opponent's energy infrastructure, their electrical system, including in Serbia and Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and everywhere else. And now it's just, you're supposed to forget that is the usual U.S. method of war, and that actually U.S. military doctrine talks about this and has, come to the justification that because the energy provided is dual use, then all of that is perfectly justified, right? And this is, not a question, right? It is U.S. military doctrine, and it has been used repeatedly in every significant conflict that the U.S. has participated in the last few decades. So now, but because Russia is doing the same thing against their proxy, suddenly there's all of this moral outrage against, the impact on civilians. Because of course, you can't deny that there is an impact on civilians too. But obviously, there's a weighted moral value. Some civilians are worth more in moral terms than others. Basically, the ones we target have no more value. Right? The ones that they target, have. So that's, Russia just ignores that noise. They just ignore that noise. As they should.
So the goal is effectively to cripple the capability for Ukraine to build weapons, move people around, etc. That's all.
Yes, absolutely.
The point.
Yes.
Yeah. There's also advancements in Pokrovsk. Reading of it,
Pokrovsk is done. I mean, it's not advancements; it's done. Pokrovsk is.
It seems like they're
what
mopping
has
up
happened
operation.
is that Russian forces there. Okay, so when I say done, there might be a few holdouts in the odd basement or building that Russians are still clearing out, but there is no organized resistance left, right? The territory of Pokrovsk is under Russian control. And if there's someone still hiding in a basement somewhere, that doesn't threaten Russian control of that territory. So now what Russia did do is they created a golden road for the Kiev regime forces to retreat from, not to the west or the northwest, to where the Kiev regime's new contact line is, but rather to the east, to the Pokrovsk adjacent settlement, really part of one urban agglomeration of Mirnograd.
They want to surrender.
Basically herded the Ukrainian forces like some kind of misbehaving cats, right? Herding cats into Mirnograd. And now Mirnograd, of course, if you take a look at a map, Pokrovsk here, Mirnograd here, right? And the Kiev regime's lines up here, which means that Mirnograd moving in that direction is actually forcing the Ukrainian troops to retreat further away from rescue and escape, right? So they're now down at the bottom of this cauldron now. And what quite obviously the Russian forces want, or the Kremlin, making the decisions, political decisions, they want to force the remaining Kiev regime forces, right, that are now corralled into Mirnograd to surrender, right? Surrender or face destruction, right? That is the terms. There's a varying numbers of how many Ukrainian troops are there. Some say a couple thousand. Others put the number much lower at this point. If you'll remember, it was almost a couple of weeks ago already, more than a week, a little bit less than 2 weeks, that the Russian military put out the official statement that there were some 5,500 troops in the Pokrovsk area, right? Obviously, that number has gone down significantly since then, with a handful probably escaping. through fields at night, being hunted by drones and hoping that it was raining or foggy or something that would allow them to maybe sneak through in ones or twos. But the majority have either been herded into Mirnograd or destroyed already. And so other people say that it's only a few hundred, somewhere between 300 and 700 left, which would mean that most of the other 4,000 and some are now no longer with us. I can't. Those are the estimates, from people who are much closer to events on the battlefield than I am. So whether it's 300 or 2,000 or somewhere in between that range, but there are somewhere between that number of Kiev regime forces that have been corralled and are stuck in Mirnograd.
Right.
And again, they're left, with a very clear and spoken, diktat: you will surrender or you will be neutralized. Yes.
Kupiansk is in a very similar situation.
Yeah. Only a few days behind.
Yeah, so the mopping up operation. So both of these are effectively going to be called within about a week of saying Russia's liberated Kupiansk and Pokrovsk.
And there's a number of settlements that are only marginally behind that. Seversk.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. They was fighting in Seversk.
Konstantinovka and Gulai Polya in the south and Zaporozhye is entering that type of encirclement process as well right now, right? I think Gulai Polya will still be resolved probably in 2026 rather than in 2025, but the rest of them will very likely be, Pokrovsk has already been resolved, right? With only this pocket in Mirnograd, adjacent Mirnograd remaining, but Kupiansk, Liman, Seversk, and probably even Konstantinovka will be wrapped up this year. Before the end.
What could it be the significance of all of these cities falling back to back to back to back?
This is okay. I have never been a proponent of a collapse scenario. Right?
Yes.
Other people have been predicting a collapse every 2 months since the conflict has began. And we're not seeing a collapse yet. We are seeing a crumbling. But there is at least a serious potential for collapse from the military and the political and the societal shock that after months of claiming, there's a stalemate and Russia is not making any progress, blah, 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 all of this misinformation and hopium and copium coming out of the West about the war of attrition that they continue to completely not understand or to deliberately disinform on. The butcher's bill of all of that for the last year is coming due now, and it will come in rapid fire succession with all of these urban settlements, all of these fiercely fought and defended strongholds crumbling and being taken by Russia one by one in very quick succession. Again, as a result of a whole year's worth of military activity and attrition of the Kiev regime. And that is the best situation for an actual potential collapse as a result of a number of those things then happening in rapid succession. Now, I'm not saying that there is going to be a collapse, but for all of those people who have been talking about collapse, a military collapse, and predicting it right around the corner, this is the first. It could potentially happen. Doesn't mean that it will, but it is potential. Now, as an aside to this, there has recently been a televised discussion between the political and military leadership of the Kiev regime, where the chief of the general staff was speaking to Zelensky, or Zelensky was speaking to him. And basically he was saying that the situation in Pokrovsk being what it is, without actually saying what it is, we've made some decisions, and those decisions will be put into effect. And when we are able to, we will tell you what those decisions were and why we've made them, right? Which
Right.
also is very ominous. And then Zelensky, very much in very openly distressed and disagreement, said, no, we have to hold Pokrovsk at all costs, because if we lose it, then the West will lose faith and then stop keeping
Giving
the
us money.
arms and financial flow going. And some people are reading this as a crack, as a division between the political and military leadership in Ukraine. And I have a different take.
What's your take? Because that's the way I read it myself.
Yeah. I think that people who think that are not cynical enough, because this was broadcast on TV for a reason, right? They didn't arrange this and then have voiced disagreement between the political and military leadership. Oh, they were talking and it just happened to go out over the airs. That doesn't happen in the Kiev regime, right? This was intentional. Why? My take is that this was part of Zelensky providing political cover for when Pokrovsk falls, so then he can then say, it was the military's decision, not mine. I wanted to hold it.
I accept that. Fair enough. Right. I mean, Zelensky did want to hold it. I mean, even in that interview, him pointing it out, saying he wants to hold it. But I want a six-pack, right? I want to be able to eat random stuff and still keep my figure. Like, meaning just because you want it doesn't mean you get it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to work, but it's, again, part of them attempting to provide a construction of political cover for Zelensky. I don't think there was an accidental disagreement between the political and leadership that just happened to be broadcast to the Ukrainian people still under the Kiev regime's control and the world. And, we just aired our dirty laundry and there's a significant disagreement and division between the political, military, and leadership as everything is falling apart in Pokrovsk and elsewhere. No, I don't believe that was, we air our big political decisions and disagreements like that on TV. No, Russia doesn't do that. Ukraine doesn't do that. And, when the U.S. can avoid it, they don't do that either, C-SPAN aside, right? Because nothing really happens important on C-SPAN anyway, right? That's not where the real arguments are taking place, not the ones that matter. Just the public performances, right?
Yeah.
This was a public performance.
But is there a level of killing or, let's say, dying where the military will?
No.
To lose 1.5 million men is extraordinary.
And yet they continue to lose, to send more men to their deaths every day.
Yeah. They would.
I think there might have once been military commanders that might have balked at some point. Those military commanders are long gone.
Larry Johnson pointed out that they need 40,000 men in order to just keep going. And obviously they can't drag that many men off the street and throw them into a uniform and throw them into.
You mean 40,000 a month or 40,000?
40,000 a month.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yeah. If you do the math between, they just announced in the BBC actually did a piece on it that officially, and again the real numbers are probably higher, but in October the official numbers from the Kiev regime are that they had 21,000 desertions just in the month of October, and that was the highest number so far. And if they say 21,000, it's probably more like 40. Right?
Yeah.
That being said, again, take everything they present. So, I mean, regardless, it is a huge number that are deserting, and even assuming, let's be generous and say that they are managing to forcibly conscript off the streets with the press gang 30,000 a month. Right? Now, you just do your own mental calculation of how many you believe that are being killed or grievously wounded beyond, the immediate return to the battlefield, which, I don't think it's any type of overestimate to say at least 1,000 a day, which is 30,000 a month, right? And that's a very low, that's an extremely low, generous figure to the Kiev regime. So 30 plus 20 right there, right? Even taking those numbers for what they were, that means the Kiev regime is hemorrhaging, that the Kiev regime military is losing sum total, at least at the very minimum 10,000 a month. Very minimum, right? And it's probably more like 30 or 40.
Yeah, that's a catastrophe. I mean, these random guys like a barber, or guys a pizza delivery guy,
like Angelina Jolie's bodyguard.
Well, she shouldn't have been there. I saw that.
She shouldn't have been there, but if she was there, she should have fought for her guy, right? I mean, he was there.
She went back and got her.
And she went to the station, and then I was like, there's nothing we can do, and they came and got him again anyway. So I regard that as, just an act of personal betrayal, because I have no doubt myself that Angelina Jolie, being what she has, and Zelensky's concern for the opinion in the West, that if she made a significant public deal out of it, that she could have secured this guy's release. But she did not follow that. I mean, she made some small attempt and then walked away, right? I just regard that as just all kinds of personal nasty on Angelina Jolie's. I mean, not that I think much of her to begin with, but anyway, that I thought was, and it's ironic that the Kiev regime isn't even abashed that they've convicted this guy. To be fair, he is he's a Sambo combat man, unarmed combat. Obviously he is military grade material, but it just goes to show that they'll even steal the bodyguards off of visiting Western celebrities at this point. That's how desperate they are, right? And there was another report from again on the Kiev regime, on the Ukrainian media, of a TCC commander, the press gang commander, saying, we take people with tuberculosis, we take homeless people, we take what is the politically correct terminology for the mentally disadvantaged these days?
Disabled.
We take all those people because that's how desperate and scraping the barrel we are at this point, right? Anywhere between 60 and officially 25.
That's a damn shame. God, man, I feel so bad for those people. I mean, that could be any random person, right? Like you were walking your dog and all of a sudden a bunch of goons get out of the car and put you in a military uniform.
I walk my dogs 3 times a day. Admittedly, I do it in a forest and there's not many people, but I still have to walk into the forest, and they're everywhere else. So why wouldn't they be in a forest too? I guess, it's
last question before I let you go. Is there a Russian warship in the Caribbean?
That I don't know. I have not seen any. I know I have seen report of. So there was a report I read about 2 Russian destroyers docked in Venezuela, and I'm like, what?
Right.
And I'm not saying it's impossible, but I haven't seen anything to me that would confirm that. So
fair enough. That's why I asked you. I very rarely believe what I see on social media.
I would be very suspicious of that until I see some confirmation that I can rely on, and I have not seen that yet. And that's all I'm going to say.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. Mark, always appreciate you, man. Your analysis is spot on. You can check Mark out on his YouTube channel, Mark Sleboda, or Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. You can check
don't take me out of my YouTube channel. Don't
really?
Check me out. No.
Okay, because I was watching your videos. Fair enough.
I'm putting that on there just to draw people to my Boosty page. I cannot put things on YouTube because, like all Russians, I am sanctioned on YouTube and I can't monetize it. And I've been censored on YouTube before, and they've removed videos for absolutely nonsense, obviously political censorship reasons. So not only don't watch me on YouTube, don't watch YouTube.
Okay, fair.
But if you want to watch me, I'm doing it simply to try to draw more people to my Boosty. Own actual page on Boosty. So I was re-putting some stuff that I do on YouTube with so this is what's actually going on over here if you want to see a lot more of it.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so check them out on Boosty.
It's sanctions proof. Substack, YouTube, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, they are not.
Okay, check him out on Boosty. You can see all of his content. You can see all of his interviews, all of that stuff. Realpolitik, Mark Sleboda. He has fantastic analysis. This is just a drop in the bucket of his analysis. So definitely check him out. Mark,
but this will be there too. This will be free to everyone.
Always check him out. Check him out. Mark, thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay? Have a good day.
You as well.
All right. So we're going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. Carl Zha. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
Good. How are you, Jamar? Always good to see you.
I am doing all right, man. It's always good to see you too, Carl. I'm glad you could join me. Carl Zha, he is host Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China, surrounding regions, and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zha. You can follow him on his podcast at Steel Silk In, and you can subscribe and support his podcast at patreon.com. Silk and Steel. Carl has a fantastic podcast. He goes through the 5,000 years of Chinese history. I'm always jealous of that, Carl. I got to be honest with you, and I'm saying that in a positive jealousy. It is very badass to be able to say, all right, next week. I know, you have a very specific thing about what you're trying to accomplish.
Next week, I will be on the 280 BC.
Really?
Yes.
Oh man, you're gonna be doing this forever. It's like you'll be 80. It's like, all right, I'm on.
I plan to live a long time, Jamar. I plan to live a long, long time.
No, man, it's a fantastic idea. There's a show called The Great War that does like World War I, World War II, the intervening years, and they do like week by week by week. It's such a fantastic idea. It gives people this almost encyclopedia of what has been going on over the course of time in regards to Chinese history. It's fascinating. I mean, so check Carl out. He's, just the idea in and of itself is worthy of being reviewed. Carl, there are a few things that are taking place. And you sent me this thing of the vice president of Taiwan speaking before the European Union. And people, obviously, in the way that people tend to do, were making the point of saying China is getting ready for war. That's what I got to be honest. I take what Mario Narfall with a grain of salt. Sometimes it depends on what the article is. If I can check the article and everything else.
He's a grifter. He's a grifter. He's an ex-grifter that just posts really clickbaity stuff to get views. And I think he maybe monetize it and get money for it. But it is what it is.
Yeah,
so,
right. But
there's no announcement. There's no announcement. I saw another people quote tweet him saying, "Oh, China CCP has made it clear year after year that the West is its enemy." So I asked the question: when did CCP said West is its enemy and you must be destroyed? And the guy tweeted, did a screenshot of my tweet. So I responded, yes, I am in fact Xi Jinping. I make the Chinese policies. I mean, people are acting really moronic nowadays on Twitter. But it is a big shift when European EU Parliament hosts a quote-unquote vice president from Taiwan, because EU Parliament is one of the three major institutions of EU, and it's the only body that actually have its people that's getting elected by EU citizens. And so them hosting this is a very deliberate act, by the way. And I suspect this is all very coordinated, because the group of EU parliamentarians that invited the so-called vice president of Taiwan to speak at EU Parliament is this group called IPAC. The IPAC is an organization supposedly of parliamentarians, mostly European, but some American as well, North American. And it's an organization co-founded by none other than Marco Rubio, our current Secretary
Really?
of the State. Yes. So this Marco Rubio actually co-founded this organization before he became the Secretary of State. I don't know why Marco Rubio has been on this anti-China grift bandwagon for so long, but I suspect he's getting funded by the military-industrial complex. It's just my hunch. There must be a reason he's doing this.
Well, it could be a combination of both, right? He's an ideologue, and because he's usually a hard-on for like these Florida Cubans,
anti-communist,
hard on Cuba, Venezuela, etc. But he also apparently has a hard on for China, also.
Yeah, because like for him, it's like, okay, I'm a Gusano from a Gusano family, ran from Cuba, so I hate all communists. I hate Cuba, I hate China, right? So yeah, so that's Marco Rubio, and this happened at a very critical juncture when EU is really getting squeezed by United States, and they're suffering the consequences of bearing the burden of the Ukraine war. As a result of Ukraine war, EU is getting cut off from the cheap Russian energy, and now they're being pressured by Washington to cut themselves off from their largest export market, with China, which is leading to effective deindustrialization of EU right now. A lot of German industrialists, they basically just left. They took their plants and moved it to United States, because in US they still can access cheap shale gas and shale oil. And this is essentially US is cannibalizing its own European quote unquote partners to bolster its own economy. And this happened in conjunction with a Dutch seizure of a Chinese semiconductor company at the behest of Washington. These are all related. Like the case of Nesperia, what happened was in late September, the Commerce Department headed by Lutnick, I like to call him Nutlick, because he's always swallowing Trump's balls. His Commerce Department came out with this new rule called the BIS 50%, which greatly expanded the number of Chinese semiconductor company on U.S. blacklist. So before September, there were about 1,400 Chinese semiconductors that was on U.S. entity list. And after the BIS 50% rule came out in September, that number got expanded to 20,000. Chinese semiconductor company, included all its subsidiaries. So United States, this is reporting according to CNN, by the way. So Washington official went to Netherlands, they went to Dutch and told them, hey, we know there's a Dutch company called Nesperia that's 100% owned by a Chinese parent company, Wintech. Well, good news is that we're going to put Wintech on our blacklist. So that would also affect Nesperia because it's owned by a Chinese company, unless you do something about the Chinese ownership. So in October, Dutch government seized Nesperia from its Chinese parent company, nationalized it essentially under a very dubious wartime provision, claiming for national security reasons. And this had a cascading event that caused a huge supply chain disruption in the semiconductors, because Nesperia used to be, it's a second generation spun off originally from Philips Semiconductor, a Dutch company. So what happened was Philips Semiconductor spun off his semiconductor division into NXP. And then NXP, they did a couple of things. One is they moved one of its semiconductor producing arm to China. And then later, NXP got spun off into Nesperia. So what happened was in around 2016, 2018, Nesperia was losing money. They're going bankrupt. They were losing their balance sheet looked really bad. So in 2016, a Chinese consortium bought it, and then in 2018, the Chinese semiconductor company Wintech then bought Nesperia 100%, become 100% owner of Nesperia. But then the Chinese parent company Wintech put in billions of dollars in investment, open additional research and development centers in Netherlands, and more crucially, they found a huge market for their product. This is because of the growth of Chinese EV industry. The EVs needs a lot of semiconductors. So suddenly, Nesperia started to become a cash cow. For the first time, for a long time, they started making money under the new Chinese management by selling the semiconductors to Chinese EV makers. Now, the caveat is their headquarters, the Nesperia headquarters is in Netherlands, but the semiconductor manufacturing arm is actually in China. So the Nesperia China used to be part of NXP. It was also bought off by the Chinese parent company Wintech, and the Wintech restructured it, so made Nesperia China a subsidiary of Nesperia Netherlands, right? So under one company. So, but it doesn't matter because everything is 100% owned by Wintech. So now Dutch government is saying, "Oh, thank you for making the company profitable again. Now I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna take your company away." And they fired the Chinese CEO, right? And locked him out of the company. So China, understandably, was very upset about this. So what happened then is the Chinese government put a ban on Nesperia, and they told the Nesperia China division that's actually making the semiconductors in China, like, look, your headquarters in Netherlands was illegally seized by Dutch government. You don't have to listen to them anymore. You are now answered directly to Wintech, and your top priority right now is to make sure you supply chips to domestic Chinese car brands, right? They get top dibs. So as for the contract, your parent company, Nesperia, signed with those European, Japanese, American car makers, well, they can wait. If those guys want semiconductor, they can come to you directly and sign contract with you. So essentially, China is freezing out the Nesperia Dutch headquarters because they don't recognize it anymore, and this caused a huge supply chain issue in the car industry, because in the car industry now they have this whole logistic chain about just in time. So they don't actually have a huge stockpile of semiconductors lying around. Like Germans, American car makers, they're all saying they're only weeks from running out of semiconductors because of this whole Nesperia issue. And in fact, that led to the Japanese car maker, I forgot it's Honda or Toyota. They actually shut down their Mexican plant because they ran out of the semiconductors. And this is all because the Dutch government's action, by the way. And then Xi Jinping and Trump met in Korea, and Trump says, "Sorry, we didn't mean it." He decided to roll back the BIS 50% rule that no longer. So Wintech, the Chinese parent company, and Nesperia no longer going to be on the American blacklist. So that removed the whole reason the Dutch government seized Nesperia
in the first place.
So now the Dutch government is trying to say, "Oh, so sorry, just a misunderstanding. We're ready to hand the company back to you now, China." I mean, okay. All I can say is, first, it demonstrates that European leaders are completely spineless. They will do, when the American says jump, they will say how high. In this case, instead of, they were in between a rock and a hard place. But at least what they could have done after Washington told them they have to get rid of the Chinese ownership, they could have just at least consulted with the Chinese and say, "Hey, Washington is forcing us to do this. How can I work with you to minimize the damage?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then might be some understanding might be worked out. But instead, they just went ahead and nationalized a Chinese company. And that really pissed off China. And that so China says, "Okay, now anybody wants semiconductors, you can still get them. but you have to sign a separate contract with the Nesperia China, and you have to pay in RMB. we don't take dollars. You have to pay in RMB
Our
to
currency.
get your
Yeah.
semiconductor, our currency, right? And everything deal in our term. Forget about these jokers in Netherlands. We don't recognize them anymore. So Dutch now realize they seize a company that's has no value anymore. It has no value. So now they're saying, okay, China, we're just kidding. You can have it back now.
Is China even going to take it back at this point? I mean, do they even need it back? I mean, they've dealt with contracts from the current company.
My personal opinion, I think China should make the Dutch suffer some consequences. I mean, who do the Dutch think they are? They're not United States. China, in comes to U.S., China often handles U.S. with like velvet kid gloves, right? But Dutch, who the hell do you think you are? You think China will not slap you around? I mean, come on. And like I told you before, there's a famous Chinese idiom called "给猴看," kill the chicken to frighten the monkey, right?
Right.
Guess what? United States is a monkey. Dutch, you are going to be the chicken. You are going to be making an example of. and right now, but this shows the whole dilemma of EU. EU has no strategic autonomy. There could have been a another pole in the multipolar world. Instead, they just slavishly attach them to Washington. And I think this is also related to the EU Parliament's invitation to the Taiwan quote-unquote vice president. Because first of all, this is through the IPAC association, which is co-founded by Marco Rubio, right? It has a very heavy Atlanticist background. And the IPAC organization, whole reason for its existence is just to be an anti-China organization in EU Parliament. And now the EU Parliament's point man for handling relationship with China came out and say, oh, actually, this does not violate our One China principle or the UN resolution 2581. The UN resolution that back in 1971 kicked out Chiang Kai-shek's regime from UN seat and give the seat to China to recognize Beijing is a sole legitimate representative of all of China. But instead, EU is there's a parliamentarian guy saying, well, actually, we recognize Beijing as sole representative of China, but we didn't say anything about Taiwan being part of China. That is a red line for China. That is the reddest of red line for China. I mean, what are you saying? You're going to say you support Taiwan independence now, or are you saying there's two China? But he said no. We adhere to the One China principle, but that doesn't prevent us from having normal relationship with the politicians on Taiwan. And they actually issue EU Parliament actually issue a whole statement saying we're going to continue engagement with former and current politicians in Taiwan, to further the ties between EU and Taiwan. Now, why would EU do this? I suspect a heavy hand of Washington, because the whole aim of this antic is to sabotage the EU-China relationship. I mean, to willingly to step on the red line, the One China principle. That's a red line. Even United States is very sensitive. Like all the U.S. president even Trump keep on repeating, yeah, we abide by One China principle, blah, blah, blah. But now EU Parliament is saying, oh, we get to interpret what One China principle means. I mean, One China principle means there's one China and one Taiwan. Yeah. And that for Chinese leadership is a no. And I think that is done intentionally to sabotage the EU-China ties, because EU and China were due to have a talk on the latest talk on the free trade deal between EU and China. Washington sabotaged that before. and now they're going to sabotage it again, right? And this is why and very sad to say, Washington plays European politicians like a fiddle, because a lot of EU politicians are essentially Washington's puppets. Like von der Leyen, like Baerbock, like Callas. They're all Washington's spokeswomen in Europe, and the European leaders, they either do not have a spine, or they have been groomed from a very early age through the different Atlanticist institutions to be put in their place where they are now, to serve as a loyal puppy dogs of Washington. So this is really bad for EU and China relationship, unfortunately. I mean, China would very much like to EU have a backbone, to have a strategic autonomy, so China can deal with EU as peers, but without Washington like looming in the background. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen, unfortunately.
I think, and this sounds bad, I think there's more of a racist reason for this. It seems that Europe has lumped itself in with America as the quote unquote white world. And I know there are different races and everything else, but for the most part, it seems like they have decided we used to be colonists. America used to be a colony. America has taken this kind of leadership role in regards to military strength, and at one point, economic industrial strength, even though they're a declining empire. And our lot as a failed entity, as a European Union of sorts. I mean, they're behind militarily, they're behind industrially, they're behind domestically. Their governments are going bankrupt. This is not a recipe for success in regards to a political entity in the way that the political entity is effectively operating. And so it seems like they've decided our lot is best in with the US. That's the only way we have any power in the globe. We have no hard power to speak of, not in the real sense of the term. We're getting crushed in Ukraine. And so as long as we are attached to America, we have some clout in the larger world. If America wasn't part of us, then we would not have any clout. I mean, NATO, for all intents and purposes, I mean, Europe doesn't even have its own military. Like, each individual country may have a military, but there's no European military. And so it's like, how do they exert influence and power in the world? Any idiot can write a letter, or any idiot can stand up and make a speech. It's another thing to be able to affect events. China has a capability to affect events. The US has a capability to affect events. Russia has a capability to affect events. The EU does not. And so it seems that they've decided our lot, in order to have any influence in the larger global world, is to effectively attach ourselves like a tick to the ass of America, and to just clinch in. They're 14% of the globe, if you add in America to it. I could be wrong, because otherwise,
no, I mean, you're not the only one who pointed this out, Jamar. This was pointed out by none other than Kieran Skinner, the former director of policy planning for the United States Department under the first Trump administration. She actually said it right out. She said China is a different challenge than Soviet Union ever was, because China is a non-Western, non-white nation. And she's speaking the truth, and she's a black woman, like, of course she got a lot of flack for it, and she got fired for
but
that.
It's
But she was speaking the truth. She said because one of her she was speaking at one of the strategic forum, whatever, and one of her co-hosts, a white woman, challenged her. So, but what about United States? US is a multi-ethnic country. We wouldn't say it's a white nation. But Kieran Skinner said, well, look around our circles of our colleague in the foreign policy department. Look at our colleague; it's mostly white men. And the other woman, yeah, okay, you're right. But that's just common sense. This is well known. I mean, like, I think there's definitely a racial dimension to this, and they're desperately afraid of being taken over by the jungle, right? They're trying to attach the precious garden to the United States. And U.S., please protect our garden with your powerful navy.
But how is it protecting the garden? I mean, as you point out, Germany is being deindustrialized. Britain and France were in economic turmoil. France, the government literally just collapsed, right? Like these governments are under massive pressure. I mean, for example, I'll give you an example. Think of the amount of money that the EU is going to have to pay in tariffs. Think of the amount of weapons that the EU is being forced to buy. Think of the amount of energy that EU is now forced to buy from either third parties or from the United States, where they're paying 3 and 4 times more than what they were paying for Russian energy. It's destroying Europe. How's that protecting?
Remember what we talk about? The U.S. tells its allies in the Western Pacific, Australia, Korea, South Korea, it's like, okay, now you guys need to die for us. You need to die for the glory of the American empire. For the Europeans, Trump is saying, you know what? You guys have to bear the financial burdens of carrying out the Ukraine war. You guys have to pay for it. The Ukraine war must go on, but you guys must pay for it. We're tired of paying for that shit. You guys have to carry the financial burden of doing so. And those European leaders are so deathly afraid of losing kind of the American security umbrella. They would do anything, even though all of them openly despise Trump. They all hate Trump. Yet, whenever they come to Washington, they sit like school children in the White House surrounding the Trump, and von der Leyen acts so demure when Trump was just saying like, yeah, Europe is gonna pay. You're gonna pay through the nose for the privilege of being a member of the American empire, and then she's just like, okay, it was a great diplomatic success. America only levy like 20% tariff on us instead of 50%. So I consider this a great success. It's hopeless. It's hopeless. It's sad.
Yeah, it's so pathetic. It's a damn shame. It really is. Like it's a damn shame. I'll just say it that way. So China, just to be very clear though. So Marwal's point of China taking how did he say it? Because I want to get exactly the way he put it. China building rafts turning effectively rafts into military boats in order to go after Taiwan. That's nonsense, right? It says Europe has defended freedom under fire.
Ferries. Yeah, the turning
ferries.
So this is actually a new development. China is they're building these like civilian transport ships that could be turned into like a military landing ship in times of war. But this is because China has the capability to do so. China has the industrial capability. They have 200 times the naval shipbuilding capability than United States. They can afford to do it. Whereas U.S. right now, even the U.S. military industrial complex is giving up on reindustrialization of America. They are talking about outsourcing, retrofitting warships to Korea and Japan because they could do it cheaper. And now there's a recent article from War on the Rocks that arguing U.S. should outsource more commercial shipbuilding to Korea and Japan. And the reason they're giving is we only have limited resources and money and shipyard. So if you will take away from our great military buildup if we were to build commercial ship in United States. So then in order to compete with China in this great naval race, then the best we can do is offshore all our commercial shipping building to Korea and Japan, our allies. And so all the shipyard in the United States will be dedicated to build for Pentagon. I mean, this is preposterous. The whole reason China have 200 times the shipbuilding capability is because they build everything. They build commercial shipping, so they gain the skills from building commercial ships that could be applied to build warships. And they built the economy of scale so they could build things much, much cheaper. And US, let's not forget, US used to be the world's most dominant shipbuilder after World War II. That's how US won the war through its industrial strength. That's how it defeated the Empire of Japan, because US can produce tons of warships and aircraft carriers like nothing. But after the war, what happened in the 1970s is the Wall Street guys, they did their numbers. They're like, you know what? Let's outsource the commercial shipbuilding to Korea and Japan, where it's much cheaper. And then what left was protected shipyards who have dedicated government contract to build for Pentagon. So what happened is a double whammy. So on one hand, all the commercial shipbuilding is leaving the United States to go to Korea and Japan. On the other hand, the remaining shipyard that has dedicated Pentagon contract, because they have guaranteed government contract, they have less incentive to innovate, to apply new technology. So they only get further left behind. So what happened now is why the U.S. commercial, the whole U.S. shipbuilding industry is in decline, because, after 40 years of offshoring, all the people that once know how to build ships, they all retired. And they haven't been able to train a new generation of people to take their place, because, those jobs are no longer here. They already outsourced to Korea and Japan. And now they want to outsource even more to Korea and Japan in order just to build warships in US. This is dumbest policy ever. But this is what happens when you have like Wall Street bros and finance bros and Silicon Valley tech bros running the government right now. They're literally taking over the White House, and their idea is, we don't need to actually make anything. We can just be the brain. We'll outsource actual building to other nations. We can just design it and let other people build it. But in China, they believe to do everything. they put eggs in all the basket, and so this is the difference. This is why China, actually, they came from behind. They only overtook Korea and Japan in shipbuilding like very recently, in the last like 20 years or so. But they were able to, because they have a dedicated industrial policy, they have a smart industrial policy. So what happened because shipping and shipbuilding is very cyclical business. So what happened is that there will be like shortages of ships that lead to a lot of order flooding the shipyard, and then they will produce a lot of ships, and suddenly the shipping rates falling, and then the shipping company going bankrupt, and then they stop ordering ships. So during the downturn, Chinese government says, okay, don't worry, we will take care of you. Nobody's going to get laid off. You guys are now going to produce for the Chinese Navy. You are now going to produce warships, because we need to match the strength of U.S. Navy. And so, and then after China produced all this Navy, when the shipbuilding kick off to the upturn again, so okay, now we have our Navy ship. You can go back to build the commercial shipping now. I mean, that's how China does things.
This is so aggravating, Carl. Because for US, me, right, we don't do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Like, that's just not the way we think. No. I mean, like, there's a saying, a capitalist will sell you the rope that you used to hang him. It feels like that. It's like there's certain things that you invest money into because it's vital for your country's national interests. Electricity grids, power, transportation, and yes, the military. And so the idea of, okay, instead of us paying Americans to do these jobs, we're going to send it to South Korea and Japan and let them do the jobs on our behalf because we can save money on it. It's not about saving money. Not everything is about, like if you need to get medical treatment, for example, let's say you need to get a cancer surgery, and one doctor says, hey man, I can do it for $10. And then the other guy says, well, it'll be $500, but it's going to be done right. You don't take the $10, right? You don't take that $10. I don't care what the guy tells you
But-
about how great he
But
is.
but
You don't
they,
take the
see, Jamar, you're making a big assumption here. Like you would actually care about what happens to your own body. But see,
Yes.
the elite that's ruling Washington, they don't think they're of the same stock as the average American people. You know the idea that empire comes home to roost. I mean, right? You know, U.S. has been treating the rest of the world as kind of the cannon fodders, you know, for like the human battery cells for their matrix, right? But now the elite is increasingly viewing average American just the same as the other third world country peons. You know, you guys are all interchangeable. You only exist for us to extract wealth from you. And this is why U.S. government can't do industrial policy, because U.S. government is designed specifically to funnel money, get vast sum of money for the taxpayer base all the way to the top 1%. That's what it's designed to do, and it does that very well. It's not designed to do industrial policy. And you know, U.S. government and Chinese government, they're all working very well to what they designed to do. You know, Chinese government is designed to do industrial policy. U.S. government is designed to funnel wealth to the top 1%.
That's mass profit.
And
yeah.
And the problem, you know, I think it's cliche to say like U.S. is going through the Latin Americanization. You know, it's like with a small group of oligarchs ruling over the mass peons that they don't care, absolutely do not care about, and that's what's happening. This is what there was. The only reason, you know, after the New Deal or after Roosevelt, that the U.S. oligarch had to share some of the pie to the working class is because the Cold War, because they had to compete ideologically with Soviet Union. They have to win over their own working class to say, hey, don't get those silly ideas about communism or socialism. Here, have a piece of pie, you know, like life is still pretty good, you know. But after Soviet Union collapsed, they see no reason to share the pie anymore. Now they want all the pie to themselves, and this is why we are heading back to the inequality level of roaring 20s, you know, of the age of robber barons. We're returning back to that level right now. It's because there's no check and balance. They're not competing with the Soviet Union trying to win over the working class anymore. They don't care anymore.
Agreed.
And this is also the whole rationale behind their drive for AI, because the whole idea is once they have AI, they can have AI working 24/7. 24/7, no sick leaves, no, they don't need to sleep. They don't need you peons anymore. You peons you can go home. We just have robots serving us masters, living in what's that movie? Like, you know, those people living in the sky.
Upload. Well, there's a movie called Upload on Amazon where the people are living in the like they have an AI heaven for the people, and companies got to the point.
I was thinking an older movie. There were like the common people living on Earth, and then the upper class that live like in the sky. I forgot.
Oh, Elysium.
Forget the name.
Elysium.
Yes. That we're hitting right there right now. This is a vision that Silicon Valley tech bro have for the rest of us.
Yeah, I agree with you, by the way. I agree with everything you just said. 1,000% agree. Because that's the point that's why they want artificial general intelligence. Hey, I don't need that person to do, especially since many of the jobs can be done at home, or many of the jobs can be done electronically. And if you have Susan, who's a robot, who can answer phones and pretend to be a person, can redirect because she can understand language enough to do that. Then think of all the secretaries, think of all the office people, think of all these people who just lose their jobs. The truckers, same thing. Taxis, same thing. Uber drivers, same thing. If you can have a car that's automatically picks up a person, drops them off. Hell, it may even know how to go to the gas station when the gas runs low because you just have a dial that tells it time to go to the gas station. Like, all of these jobs are going to go away. Give it 20, 30 years. Mark my words. I may not be here, but Lord knows that seems to be the game plan. This is Hegseth, Secretary of War.
We are
Secretary of
pivoting
War.
the Pentagon.
Listen to what he says here. And because this dovetails to what you were talking about. If there is a war between China and the US, the first place that's going to get bombs are the industries in Japan that are effectively making ships and boats or whatever the hell the US is giving out. Those things should be built at home. Hegseth is effectively saying the Pentagon is pivoting to a state of war.
We're not just buying something. We're solving life and death problems for our warfighters. We're not building for peacetime. We are pivoting the Pentagon and our industrial base to a wartime footing. Building for victory should our adversaries FAFO. We're not just...
He literally just said, fuck around and find out. This is the Secretary of War. What the hell, man? This is such a degradation of, when an empire is declining, when the president curses, like drops the F-bomb in the middle of a formal address.
You mean when the reality TV show host became the president?
Yes, the guy who was in wrestling WWF for a while.
What was Pete Hegseth's previous job before he became Secretary of the War? Remember?
Yeah, he was a TV personality. Yeah. I mean, but the idea that the Pentagon person is saying fuck around and find out is outrageous. What the hell?
In the, Jamar, the Idiocracy, the movie, that's a future documentary. We're living in it right now.
Like it. We all thought that movie was just funny, right? It was like, oh, this is hilarious that these dumb people are now taking over the globe. Like you said, that's a documentary. Let's begin to look like a documentary. So he is effectively saying we are pivoting the Pentagon to a position of war, and we are buying stuff with the idea of dealing with a war. Okay, a war against who? Who are you fighting a war with? Any war you fight is the end of the world.
And he actually says now today is more like 1939. So I'm like,
yes, he did.
What are you gonna invade Poland?
Yes, he did.
What are you gonna do? You're gonna invade Poland?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so ridiculous. This is.
I mean, and just for the audience will know, that's the Second World War. Effectively, that's when Hitler goes into Poland, initiating the Second World War.
Invaded Poland to kick off Second World War. So for this is why remember Trump actually, one of his campaign promise was to get out of the perpetual war, to pivot away from foreign intervention. But guess what? The perpetual war must go on. This is just like the Professor Jeffrey Sachs recently gave an interview talking about who really runs the United States, and he says it doesn't matter who's the president, right? It's those guys in suits, and they set the policies. I mean, that reminds me of what President Putin said during Tucker Carlson interview. He talked about the time when he applied to join NATO, and he told Clinton. Clinton says, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me check with my people. I'll get back to you." And later, Clinton says, "Oh, I checked with my people. They said no." and you gotta think, okay, who is calling the shots here? Who is setting the policy? Who are these people you are checking with, right? Who is really running United States government? But it's a Mickey Mouse. It's a military industrial intelligence complex, the congressional academia complex, the Mickey Mouse, or the military industrial complex. They are the ones always running the show, and they must be fed. And in order to feed them, this is why you need to pivot from one war to the next. You got to go from Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya to, it doesn't really matter where it is. Like Assange says, the whole point is not to win the war. The whole point of we're in Afghanistan is to get the vast sum of money to wash them from the pockets of the taxpayer base of North America and Europe into the pockets of a very small transnational security elite. And this is why they arrested Assange. This is why they put him in solitary confinement, because he spoke the truth. And this is what U.S. is doing right now. They're like, okay, Ukraine might be a bad idea. We'll let the Europeans pay for it, handle it. We're going to pivot to Venezuela, right? We're gonna focus on somebody who is much smaller than our size because Russia and China is too much to take on right now.
Oh, but they're still in that war. Oh, they're still in that
Oh,
war. I mean, and to
no,
make
no.
it even worse. Oh, go ahead.
So I think what they're doing is they decided, okay, maybe instead of confronting Russia and China head on, we are going to nibble at their periphery. We're going to stop the Chinese and Russian influence from Latin America, from Africa. And this is why they're targeting Venezuela and Nigeria right now. Now they're saying there's a Christian genocide in Nigeria that necessitate U.S. to serve and protect. I mean, this is completely bogus. The whole like Boko Haram thing in Nigeria, how did that come about? It came about because of the United States, because U.S. supported a bunch of jihadists to overthrow Gaddafi. And when that happened, all these terrorists got their hands on Libyan weapons and they flooded into the Sahel region, destabilizing Mali, Nigeria. That necessitated more U.S. and French military intervention in those places. And now it's their excuse for doing another intervention in Nigeria. And when Nigeria's government already said, no, thank you. We welcome your help to deal with terrorists, but it's on our terms. We don't want to be your...
Yeah, I mean, like the rub is like I always say, people lie to start wars. There's not a Christian genocide in Nigeria. Like Christians are dying, but so are Muslims. And as you point out, here's another question: where are Boko Haram and some of these other groups continuing to get weapons? Where they're continuing to get bullets? How are they paying for this stuff?
Yeah,
how are they paying for it? It's not magic, right? So you think that basically we don't want to deal with Russia and China directly. Venezuela has a relationship with China, Russia, and Iran. China has become South America's largest trading partner. So we need to invade South America in some way in order to effectively put a stop to it and regain control of that region by having a military intervention that would allow us, let's say, continued military conflict in South America.
Venezuela is basically BRICS adjacent, right? I mean,
yes.
It's not in the BRICS, but it's BRICS adjacent. But U.S. sees Venezuela as like the weakest link that it can push over. And Trump liked to go for easy victories, right? They think it will be easy to do a regime change in Venezuela, like how they always think. And also, U.S. want to have a monopoly over Venezuelan oil. Venezuela has the world's largest oil reserve, and China is now largest purchaser of Venezuelan oil, and China is also trying to help Venezuela to update their oil industry so they can refine their own crude oil instead of just exporting it and import refined petrochemical products. But United States depends on Venezuelan oil because a lot of the refinery in the southern United States, they are set up to refine heavy crude, the same type of crude that's produced in Venezuela. Whereas the shale oil they get from fracking is light sweet oil. Those are not suited for the refinery in the southern United States. So U.S. export those raw crude it gets from fracking and imports Venezuelan oil for the U.S. refinery to process. So even now, ExxonMobil get a waiver from Trump to continue to import Venezuelan oil. So what they don't want is they don't want the Venezuelan oil to go to China. That's what's going on.
I see. And the same thing I would imagine with Nigeria, where it's like, all right, we need to get further ensconced in Africa.
Yes.
Oh man.
Yes. China is also investing heavily in Nigerian infrastructure. This is why U.S. is trying to curtail Chinese and Russian influence in Africa and Latin America, because that's the places U.S. think they can have advantage through proxy war, color revolution, and regime change.
What does China like? I'm always shocked that China never responds to that stuff. I mean,
China still adheres to its non-interventionist foreign policy, and China is also very realistic about its own power projection capability. Right. So right now, China's military is designed to maintain its superiority around its neighborhood, right? This has been demonstrated by the recent Chinese military parade. But China still lacks a power projection to, send the Chinese Navy to Latin America or to Africa, right? The Chinese Navy is not designed for that. It's designed to protect its own neighborhood, and that's not the role of the world police. Is not the role that China seek to replace. The U.S. keep on thinking China is going to replace U.S. as a world hegemon, and China has no interest in that. But having said that, China do work different. How China and Russia, the way they work is Russia usually provide the hard power.
Yes.
The muscle. China provide the economic lifeline. This is how usually the Russia will come in to provide with weapons, military assistance, and sometimes military intervention, like in the case of Syrian war. China will provide economic assistance and investment and economic lifeline. This is how, because that's the strength of China. China is leveraging its own strength, and it does not count. It works with Russia in tandem in that way. They don't kind of butt heads. So that makes sense.
Will China be forced to create a power projection as a way of, because I used to have these conversations where I would ask, how does a country that plays chess deal with a country that plays Go, or vice versa? How does a country that plays Go deals with a country that plays chess? And what I mean by that is, chess is
I don't think
zero-sum.
Trump played chess, by the way. I don't think Trump should play chess. He maybe checkers.
Right. But let's say, just as you point out, the U.S. president is hobbled by a lot of people around the president that has a very specific objective, meaning Trump may not know policy papers, right? I don't believe for a moment that Trump has read a policy paper in his life. People around him have. And if you look at this notion of overextending Russia, if you look at Pathway to Persia, these are things that Donald Trump was enacting in the way that he was operating, meaning that was the U.S. was still enacting those policies. Now, he may not have did it to the letter of the document per se, but they were definitely going in that direction, right? So when we're looking at this, even the notion of going after Venezuela and Nigeria, that's chess, right? It's like, okay, we can't go after them directly because we'll lose the game because everybody dies. So let's go around and hit at certain edges. Okay, so Venezuela may be a weak point. Nigeria may be a weak point, especially if nobody's going to intervene into those regions, and we don't expect anyone to intervene. So those are areas that we can put pressure upon. Those are areas that we can either usurp the oil, for example, or that we can, if necessary, invade in order to occupy those regions and make it that much more difficult for China to operate in South America. That's chess, right? That's not playing Go where you're trying to bring people within your fold willingly. That is, we're taking something in order to prevent somebody else from getting their hands on it. Does China have to ultimately do that?
Well, okay. So China believes, if you look at Art of War, Sun Tzu basically tells you play to your own advantage. You play to your own strength.
Yes.
U.S. think its strength is military power. That's why it throws its weight around. China can do things differently. China has dominance over the rare earth supply chain. China can just choke off the rare earths to the U.S. military industrial complex. I mean, like I said, China has only rolled back the latest rare earths expanded export control in October. The earlier export control on rare earth is still very much on, and U.S. military industrial complex is still going to have a problem to source those critical minerals from China. How are they going to justify to the Chinese Commerce Department when they apply for the export license? Well, we need more rare earth supplies so we can supply our expeditionary force to Venezuela and Nigeria. Can have some more export rare earths for the next 6 months.
Will China do that though? Will they really say, like, for example, if the U.S. attacks Venezuela? Now, even Europe has come out and say, this is outrageous that you're murdering people in the Caribbean. Even Europe, for God's sake, is like, yeah, man, we can't even justify this. You are murdering fishermen. Let's be very clear what's taking place. The president is doing something grotesquely illegal and is effectively giving illegal orders. Will China say, look, if you do that, you're not getting anything from us in the context of rare earths? China has been very reluctant to get into a trade war.
So right now, the Trump policy is like the reverse Teddy Roosevelt, right? Teddy Roosevelt said, speak softly, but carry a giant stick. United States right now is talking very loudly and waving an increasingly diminishing stick. And whereas China does not loudly issue threat, right? The way United States does. It conducts quiet diplomacy.
Yes.
Like the rare earth restriction on U.S. military industrial complex still on today. China doesn't have to say anything about it. They don't have to make a big announcement. So like, we got you by the balls. But but they just know. They just know they have that power. and U.S. also beginning to understand finally after 7 months. So that's how China plays. China doesn't beat its chest like, I got the power, fear me, right? If you're Mike Tyson, you don't need to constantly try to project strength. People know you are strong. People back off. That's how China plays the game.
There's a story about Mike Tyson where he was this guy he was talking about, he was at a bar or he was trying to get into a nightclub, and apparently the bouncer was getting very aggressive with him. I don't know what was taking place between these guys. Mike Tyson shows up and is like, hey man, this guy bothering you? In which case the bouncer is like, you want to go into the club? Hey, go into the club. Like it's Mike Tyson, right? Like everybody knows. Iron Mike. So just kind of let the guy through. No, I understand your point. It's effectively like, you guys can do this, but there will be consequences for you doing this. We don't have to state it, but they will be there.
Having said that, I still think China should make an example out of Dutch. And I think the rest of the world will rejoice, especially where I am. I live in Bali right now. I think a lot of Indonesians will support that to see the Dutch humbled.
These are balls. Like, it's like, I mean, like the nerve of them doing that. Yeah, Europeans should have a backbone, man. Carl, always appreciate these conversations, man. Always appreciate you joining me. The audience loves you. We have a really good crowd today. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow his podcast at Steel Silk In. Yeah, I got that right. And you can subscribe and support the podcast at patreon.com/silk and steel. By the way, Carl, is there anywhere else? I want to make sure I get all of your spots, because sometimes calendar.
So my Twitter, I'm a prolific ship poster on Twitter. You can follow me there if you enjoy ship posts. Or I do a little bit more serious talk on my YouTube, where I talk more about geopolitics. And for my audience on Patreon, I do all that, plus I do that 5,000 Chinese history rundown. And currently I'm on 280 BC, and I have a long way to go. So thank you, Jim.
So wait, is it each year, or is it? Do you do?
Previously my source material was like annual. It was like year by year. So now I'm moving a little bit faster. Now I'm moving maybe like 5 year, 10 year at a time. So yeah.
Oh, you're cheating your audience.
Well, I'm limited by my source material, man. I can't just make shit up, dude.
No, it's like, I was going year to year now. Yeah, I'm doing 5 years now. It's like 5,000 years looks a little high. It's like, this is a big mountain that I need to climb. Maybe I need to find a better way to climb this mountain. No, man, I totally get it. It's just, that's such a long time. It's like it's such a long span of time. That's all. It's I totally. That is a lot of data, and that is a lot of information in order to corral. So check Carl out, man. Definitely check him out. Carl, you are fantastic. Thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yeah, Carl is great. Carl is awesome. And I'm going to go from one damn good guest to another damn good guest. We are joined with Dimitri Lascaris, the man himself. How you doing, Dimitri? You doing okay today?
I'm doing fine, Jamal. How you doing? You look great.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Dimitri Lascaris, he's lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party in 2020. He is host of Reason to Resist. Check him out on YouTube. Dimitri, I'm glad that you could join me, man. Always appreciate these conversations.
Me too.
So Turkey has issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Not to mention Netanyahu's a list of criminals in Israel that they effectively issued an arrest warrant for. And I looked at that and I was like, but you guys helped overthrow Syria. Like it's the hypocrisy of it that gets me. Give me a take on this. Is this purely for domestic consumption? Is there some other reality that I'm completely missing on this?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there is some seriousness to it. There's definitely some, shall we say, grandstanding and showboating going on.
Right.
I mean, you highlighted, what Turkey has done in Syria, which was very much to the advantage of Israel's genocidal regime, namely overthrowing a government or helping to overthrow a government that was hostile to Israel and friendly to Hezbollah and Iran. That was a big, change in the region, which Turkey very much helped to bring about. But there's other things that are going on. Turkey, also was reputed to be one of the 3 countries that put intense pressure on the resistance in Gaza, the others being Qatar and Egypt, to accept this joke of a ceasefire, which Israel has violated every single day. And they were supposed to be the guarantors of this ceasefire. They've guaranteed nothing. Not only has Israel killed Palestinian civilians on every single day of the ceasefire since October 11th, an average, by the way, of about 8 persons per day killed and about 15 wounded. But in addition, it's only let in less than 30% of the humanitarian aid to a starving population. What has Turkey done about this? This would be much more useful to actually do something to force Israel to comply with the ceasefire than these arrest warrants. Now, having said that, first of all, they're setting a precedent amongst NATO states, issuing arrest warrants, domestic arrest warrants for not just Netanyahu, but also the current defense minister, Israel Katz. The total number of persons is 37. I understand they haven't published the whole list, but the ones who are there also Ben-Gvir. So that adds public pressure onto other countries that are supposedly committed to the rule of law. Also, if they submit these arrest warrants to Interpol, Interpol is usually obliged to issue what is called a red notice, and that obliges other states, although they have to, ultimately whether or not they will arrest these people in compliance with the red notice is a matter of their own domestic laws, which they may or may not enforce and apply. But in theory, other states, which would include, European states, the United States, Canada, would be obliged to arrest these people pending extradition. If indeed there is a way to get them extradited from the arresting country to Turkey. And by the way, Turkey does have an extradition treaty with the United States. It does have extradition treaties with EU countries, but EU countries typically do not extradite to Turkey, citing, political motivations for the arrest warrant.
Yeah.
So in any case, this does apply pressure. It does actually have some legal significance. But I have to tell you, quite apart from all of the reasons we have to be skeptical about Erdogan's motivations, Jamal, at the same time as he did this, and he could have done this a long time ago, there's this big discussion taking place about whether or not Turkey will be part of this multinational force in Gaza. Right. And I think already Israel was very uncomfortable with that, was pushing back that Turkey would be part of that. You could pretty much drive the nail into the coffin of the idea that, Turkey is going to participate in a multinational force now. And so I have no proof to back this up, but I'm a little bit suspicious that Turkey did this at this particular moment to kill any suggestion that it would be taking part.
Oh, I see your point. I see your point. Israel's going to scream bloody murder. We don't want the Turks to be part of this force.
It's entirely predictable that Israel would put its foot down at this stage, say there's absolutely no way in hell we're going to allow the Turks in Gaza, right? So was that the motivation or part of it? I don't know. It's possible.
Oh, that's super interesting. I didn't even think of that. That's super interesting. I mean, will there ultimately be a multinational force in Gaza? I mean, from my understanding, none of the states wanted to be involved in this, even though all of them signed up for it, weirdly enough.
There's the practical question of whether they can put together a force that will be willing to go in there. Let's just park that for a second. And then there's the question of the legality of it. There is no legal basis for the infusion of foreign forces into the Gaza Strip at this time. This is occupied Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice ruled last year that the occupation of Gaza is ongoing and is illegal and must end forthwith. And simply to replace, troops approved by Israel from other countries with the current occupying force, I think would be a blatant violation of international law. Now, if it's approved by the UN Security Council, then there would be a legal basis potentially for this to be done. And I understand that there is a plan that's going to be put to the UN Security Council. And the question is going to be whether China and Russia are going to tolerate this. And if they do, the Palestinians are objecting vociferously, not just Hamas, all of the resistance groups, with the possible exception of Fatah, which is not really a resistance group, the party of Hamas. Although I think the armed wing of Fatah is objecting, but Mahmoud Abbas himself, of course, is not going to put a stop to this. So they're saying no. Are China and Russia going to allow the UN Security Council to overrule the Palestinian people? I hope not, but it's possible.
Okay, I am well beyond this idea that there's a such thing as international law. I don't think it exists. So there's that. As for China and Russia, give me your thoughts on that. I mean, from my point of view, China. I had this conversation with someone in the region, and there is a persistent tension on this channel. You've seen some of it, just with Carl Jha. I'm sorry, with KJ No.
Right.
And the persistent friction has to do with different, let's say, wings or different interests. So you have people who cover China, you have people who cover the Middle East, you have people who cover Russia, you have people who are kind of in between all of these items. You have people cover domestic. People from the Middle East have a strong sense that they've been abandoned, that Russia and China have, for the most part, effed them over, in a sense. And that this idea of Russia being part of the resistance was never really a real thing. And I mean, they can go hardcore with this and some of their points of view on this. I disagree with those points of view. I get where they're coming from and I understand where they're coming from, but I don't entirely agree with all the points of view that they take on this. But some of them go very hard on this. From my point of view, people have this belief that BRICS, that Russia and China, because they consider themselves anti-imperialists in the way that they operate, that they would behave differently in the world, and that they would take, let's say, stronger positions on issues like Gaza, or stronger positions on issues that come up where you're getting the West overplaying their hand, and they rarely do. And so it's like, from my point of view, these are realist governments. And as realist governments, they do with this in their interests. Give me your take on this. I mean, where do you think they're going to fall in this in regards to the UN Security Council?
Well, let's start by talking about their general posture, their general approach to international relations. I think they are anti-imperialist when it comes to their own sovereignty.
Yes, agreed.
We will not be dominated by you or any other foreign power. They are clearly, Russia and China, passionately committed to that principle, and they're willing to go to war to defend their own sovereignty, even against the entirety of NATO, as we've seen. Yes. Now, when it comes to defending the sovereignty of others against Western imperialism, they have a very mixed record. It's just, what did they do to defend the sovereignty of Syria? And Russia was in a very good position to do that because it had military bases in Syria and knew the place well. And yet, although it did defend the internationally recognized government of Assad, whatever you may have thought of Bashar al-Assad, he was the internationally recognized leader of Syria. And so they did initially defend the internationally recognized government of Syria, but ultimately they acceded to his overthrow, the Russians. And although they gave him asylum in some form in the Russian Federation, they're now openly embracing this head chopper al-Jilani as the legitimate president of Syria, which is really quite appalling, frankly. China, I think it's interesting to compare China and Russia to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union actively exported revolution, that was supported by socialist and Marxist movements in countries around the world. And it went to the point of even arming them, providing them intelligence, providing them with very substantial economic support, as it did to Cuba in its efforts to fight against US imperialism. But Russia has not followed in that tradition. I think in many ways, I saw an interesting article recently about how Russia today continues to benefit from that tradition in its relations with the global South.
Yes.
A lot of people remember fondly, how the Soviet Union actively intervened to defend the sovereignty of states in the global South for decades. But that's just not Russia's gig nowadays. And in a way, you can kind of understand it because Russia is not
The Soviet Union.
it's as formidable as the Soviet Union.
Right.
So it has a much smaller population. It had to overcome the crisis of the 1990s. It took a lot of time for that to happen. It has been consistently targeted by the West. So I don't want to sound too critical of the Russian Federation, but at the end of the day, I come back to what I said at the outset. Their priority is to defend themselves from imperialism, not to defend others. So when it comes to what they're going to do in this particular case, Jamal, in the case of a foreign force inside the Gaza Strip, when this so-called peace deal was announced, Vladimir Putin was rather complimentary.
He was.
He made comments at the Valdai conference congratulating Donald Trump and so forth. Now, in his typical diplomatic fashion, he couched his language in a way that left some wiggle room to the Russian Federation's government about whether or not they would support this deal. Okay, he didn't, he was talking about the need for respecting the Palestinian right of self-determination. The government has consistently stated, the government of Russia, that it wants to see a Palestinian state, and it will not, accede to the permanent subjugation of the Palestinian people. So there's that. But he was rather complimentary. China, on the other hand, when Xi met with Trump recently, and in the lead up to that meeting, didn't say anything complimentary about this so-called peace deal. There was no, attempt to flatter the Donald, no attempt to legitimize this travesty. So if I had to put my money on one of these governments coming to the defense of the Palestinians at the UN Security Council, I'd say it more likely would be China. But at the end of the day, they tend to act together in the UN Security Council. So I think they'll come to some kind of an understanding about this and take a joint position. I don't know where they're going to go with it. I think a lot of it will depend on the composition of this force. Who's going to be in it? And exactly what do the Palestinians say about it? So that's where best I can do.
No, that's fair. Look, I have sympathy for Russia on this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're in the middle of a war. I strongly suspect that the conflict ultimately is going to boil down to, as you point out, they defend their own sovereignty. And if anything pops off from the standpoint, Russia, China, NATO, etc., then whatever that world is after that is a different world. But in the middle of a war, when they're under sanctions, they're under pressure, and in their mind, most likely, a third world war is brewing, it is very hard to kind of take these, let's say, extravagant positions in order to overly extend yourself, if that makes sense. Whereas China seems to take a different tact. China's thing is, we are peer, you're going to treat us as a peer. I'm not going to flatter you. I'm not going to pretend that you're something else. I'm dealing with you as an equal, which means I don't have to flatter you. I don't have to pretend that this quote-unquote ceasefire is really a ceasefire. I don't know what they're going to do in the UN Security Council. I honestly don't. I guess my thing is the peacekeeping force that's going to be put on the ground when Israel goes to kill 8 Palestinians, is the peacekeeping force going to get involved?
Yeah, well, that depends on who's in it. I think that's a short answer. Just to go back to what you said, let's just park that for a second. Just to go back to what you said.
Please.
I totally agree with what your sentiments, right? I think we have to be mindful of the fact that the Russian Federation is locked in an existential war with the entirety of NATO.
Yes.
And these people are hell-bent on destroying Russia in any and all ways possible, not just militarily, economically, politically, whatever. So China is better positioned. And China also has a substantially larger economy, a substantially larger population, substantially larger military budget. And so it has, it could be more proactive in terms of defending oppressed peoples of the global south in Russia at this time. But the UN Security Council veto doesn't cost these guys anything, Jamal. So, I mean, there's no excuse for that. The fact that Russia is at war with NATO, it's not like they're going to get any love from the West by going along with this plan. They're still going to be hated. They're still going to be hunted. So they may as well do the right thing and exercise their veto.
No, agree. I do agree. No, I do agree with you. I didn't mean it in the context of the UN Security Council vote. I just meant it in this kind of, I just meant it in a larger capacity of things.
Now let's go to the question of the composite. Sorry, we parked this question of the composition of the force.
Yes.
I guess I can imagine some countries that would go in there, their military forces, and they would actively defend the Palestinians. So, for example, if by some miracle they allowed Ansar Allah to be part of this, I think they'd be in for some trouble. But same thing if they allowed Iran. But obviously, that's not going to happen. The Israelis and the Americans are only going to sign off on countries that will do nothing. That's why this thing should be vetoed, by the way. That's one of the reasons. Number one reason is Palestinians don't want it. Okay, this is their land, and they don't want foreign forces on their land. But the number two reason is anybody who gets approved by Israel and the United States to go in there is going to be a collaborator.
Yes. No, agreed. Can we talk about BRICS for a bit?
Sure.
And I want to talk about it in the capacity of people's view of BRICS. People seem to have a view of BRICS as if it's something similar to the previous Soviet Union. Now, and let me give context. A government that has an ideology associated with it. And you can say all governments do. America's a capitalist country, maximize profit. You have this kind of hegemonic idealism that's associated with the way that the U.S. operates. The Soviet Union, and the way that you put it, had a revolutionary ideology built into it at some level. And it understood that it was in this kind of existential conflict with the West. And so it would arm the global South. It would arm, let's say, give money and resources to Africa. It would do those things because those things were kind of built within the context of the ideology of it. People see BRICS seemingly in a similar way. When they look at BRICS, they think to themselves, oh, we have this secondary edifice, this other device, where you don't have to go in the Western direction. You can go in this other direction for the global South and so forth. And they're expanding, they're getting bigger, they're getting et cetera. And they seem to think of them in very similar terms. And then they're confused when it's like, hey, I don't understand how the BRICS nations aren't getting involved. Hey, I don't understand how the BRICS nations aren't doing X or Y. I think they're getting this wrong. I don't think the BRICS nations is this Soviet Union replacement. I think these are realist governments. And they're doing things that are in their interests and in the interests of the organization itself as the organization grows and expands. Give me a take on this, because I've noticed when people do videos, their hopes are built into it heavily, as opposed to just, well, what are they doing? As opposed to what do you hope they're going to do? Or do you think I'm wrong on this in the way I'm looking at the way people's analysis of BRICS versus what BRICS actually is?
I think you just look at the composition of BRICS. It tells you all you need to know. I mean, there are countries in there that are egregious human rights violators and are aspiring regional hegemons like, Saudi Arabia and the UAE and so forth. If they're not full members, they're on the way to becoming that. They're being embraced by the core BRICS countries. So there's this vast disparity in political systems, in orientation towards capitalism, towards the question of religion and state. So that club is open to anybody who basically is willing to respect the sovereignty of the other members, right? Yeah. That's it. I mean, this is really a marriage of convenience. There is a lot of mutual trade going on, increasingly so. Joint efforts to protect each other from dollar hegemony. But this is not in any way, shape, or form a replacement for the Soviet Union. I think that's crystal clear. They ain't going to be exporting any particular vision of how a society should be formed, because they themselves aren't in agreement on that. Look at the diversity of political and economic systems within the BRICS. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to the BRICS if and when the West is finally defeated and accepts that it is no longer the global hegemon. Will it stay together? Will rivalry within the BRICS, for example, between Russia and China or China and India, will it increase it? That may well happen. I hope not. We'll have to see. But at this stage, I think it would be naive for anybody to expect the BRICS to take a position of moral leadership in the world. That's not something we're going to get out of the BRICS anytime soon.
But isn't that a positive on some level? Like the fact that you do have so many different political systems and ideologies. Some of these places are religious, some are less so. And it's this kind of respect of sovereignty that's built into the way that the country where they're operating. And I get it, respect for their sovereignty. Like you said, they're not necessarily going to take a moral position on political affairs that are taking place on the global stage. But they've made the strident argument of, look, we're not getting involved in other people's political affairs. And so if you come to be part of us, you will be a sovereign nation. We are not going to intrude upon your sovereignty. Doesn't that make a statement in and of itself, though?
Within limits, it's an entirely reasonable and defensible position. But the problem is that there are, sovereign states can limit their own sovereignty by consensually entering into treaties which impose limitations on their sovereignty. And the prime example of this right now at this particular moment is the Genocide Convention. They have all signed on to the Genocide Convention. And under Article 1, I've been saying this till I'm blue in the face, Jamal. Under Article 1 of the Genocide Convention, they have an obligation to prevent and punish genocide. And the BRICS countries, with the exception of probably South Africa, okay, to be fair, because they brought the case to the ICJ, but they're selling coal to Israel. There's nobody in the BRICS that is complying fully with Article 1 of the Genocide Convention. Nobody put a gun to their head and said, you have to sign the Genocide Convention. As sovereign states, they agreed to do that. So they have an obligation to comply with the undertakings that they made. And they're not. They're all flouting them to varying degrees. So sovereignty is not absolute. And I want to go back to something, especially when people, who lead these states agree consensually as part of a mutual compromise to place brakes on their own sovereignty. And I want to go back to something that you said earlier about there being no such thing as international law.
Yeah.
Okay. You could say the same thing about domestic law, Jamal. I mean, the law is only as good as it is enforced. The United States has been run by a goddamn war criminal, one after another, surrounded by war criminals for my entire life. And not a single one of them, even though they violated egregiously domestic laws of the United States, not a single one of them is held to account. Donald Trump right now is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. He's not just doing it in Gaza, he's doing it in the Caribbean. Flagrant violations of domestic law. So you could say the same thing about domestic law. At the end of the day, we shouldn't give up on international law just because it's so poorly enforced. We should demand its enforcement, just as we should demand that our domestic laws be enforced against the powerful. If we give up on that, we're just going to descend in outright barbarism.
Well, I think we are in barbarism. I mean, from my point of view, that's where we are. The president of the United States is murdering random people in the Caribbean. Nobody in the globe is saying, hey, that's outrageous. That's illegal. How are you just randomly murdering people? Meaning even by our domestic laws, that is outrageous, even though we give the president a large amount of latitude in order to effectively kill people around the globe. You would think internationally, under international law, they would say, that's illegal. Nobody says it. Nobody does anything about it. They allow it to happen. The reason why I said there's no international law is because there's no Leviathan. There is nothing above, it's not like you have king of the world, or it's not like you have God that gets involved, or alien species that gets involved and says, well, we're going to ensure that laws are followed, and we have a police force to ensure the laws are being followed. The president can be impeached. Donald Trump was impeached twice. The president can be locked up. Nixon was nearly put in a cage for Watergate and the stuff that was taking place. Yes, they evaded the law, but the legal process still kicked into play and still was enacted. Donald Trump was nearly put into a cage over fake stuff in and of itself. I'm saying domestically, each individual country has a police force, they have a legal code, and they have a police force to enact that legal code that would affect, meaning you have muscle that will beat you, kill you, or put you in a cage. In an international sense, I don't see that. You just have individual countries, and individual countries make up their own mind in regards to what they do and what they want to do or what they don't want to do. And yeah, I think we are in barbarism. I mean, we've just watched a genocide take place for 3 years. We've just watched Trump murder people in the Caribbean, let alone the other wars that were taking place. But even if you say you isolate those wars, I don't see how, short of locking up a random African dictator, I don't see how this stuff comes into play in real terms. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong on this.
Well, I think it's a question of degree. I don't think that there's no enforcement in international affairs and that there's robust enforcement domestically. I think it's a question of degree. Is there more enforcement domestically than in international affairs? Yes, by a substantial margin. But I watched last night this one of George Galloway's wonderful monologues, and he was talking, apparently, I didn't know this, that it's just been revealed that a cop planted a pipe bomb. Somebody was working for the CIA and was caught on January 6th. And George Galloway, you just talked about Watergate. George Galloway said, this is far worse than Watergate. I agree with it. I don't know about the facts. I'm just listening to what George had to say. If that's true, and Kash Patel was sitting on this information for 10 months, knowing that it was a cop and didn't reveal it voluntarily, this was revealed to the public by other means. Does that sound to you like, you know, the domestic laws of the United States are being enforced against the powerful? I could give plenty of examples of this. And there are instances, okay, there is discrimination in the enforcement of international law. They call it the International Caucasian Court for a reason, the ICC, right? As they keep going after people from the global south, particularly from Africa. But there is a level of enforcement. And it's not, I don't think it's correct to say that nobody is saying anything about what Trump is doing in the Caribbean. The Russians and the Chinese have condemned it. I think they're very clear that they regard this as a violation of international law. Volker Turk, senior human rights figure from the United Nations, has openly condemned it, said it's criminal. Many nations in Latin America are fuming about this and openly condemning the Trump administration for it. Now, is that going to ultimately deter Trump? Maybe not, but it's something. They are invoking international law and they are condemning it. So I look at it as a spectrum, and domestic laws are generally enforced to a greater degree than international laws. But when it comes to how bad things are, it could get a lot worse than this, Jamal. You say we're in the law of the jungle. It could get a lot worse. I think for the time being, international law does influence the behavior of states to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's nowhere near enough. But if we throw up our hands and say, to hell with international law, it's meaningless, drivel, I think things could get considerably worse.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough.
By the way, this is a sentiment. I just want to say I get this from my audience all the time on Reason.
Do you? When you bring up international law, yeah. It's like, yes, things could get worse, but how? Like, what? Meaning, what would be different? Like, for right now, you had Obama, who had killers, who would just murder random people in these various countries. You had the United States go into Syria and help overthrow the government of Syria. You have Trump murdering Caribbean fishermen. You had previous presidents to go into Iraq and then effectively lie to the population about it in order to murder 1 million Iraqis, or at the very least get 1 million Iraqis killed, not to mention paying for terrorists to try to overthrow various countries. Okay, all of this stuff is like clear, like meaning anybody who cared to look could see it. It's not even hidden at this point. It's not like the president, or it's not like the United States hides the fact of their behavior in these cases. How could it get worse?
You could see a lot more war, a lot more torture, a lot more invasion of the sovereign territory of countries, a lot more disregard for international maritime law, the laws of the sea. You could see a hell of a lot more than that. It's pretty bad now. I agree, but it could get a lot worse. I mean,
see,
the whole world is chaos. I mean, we don't have outright chaos globally at this time. There's still a certain
Don't we?
degree of order. No, no,
I
we
mean,
don't. I mean, you can cross borders into a lot of countries, Jamal, and feel reasonably safe going there. But if we descend into full-blown chaos where there is no respect for international law by anybody, and it's just pure law of the jungle, you can forget about leaving the borders of your own country. You're not going to want to travel internationally.
well,
And
the
so in
only
fact,
reason.
sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
please, no, finish. No, please finish. Please.
I
I'm
think
sorry.
the mere fact that we still today have so much international commerce and international mobility is a testimony to the fact that there is some kind of international legal order that still functions to a minimal degree. There hasn't been a complete breakdown, and if there is, we're probably finished as a species.
Okay, yeah, you might be right. You could be right. I get the sense that the reason there's not more maritime violations is because countries have militaries, and they don't necessarily want to trigger a war between, let's say, China, Russia, and the U.S. and NATO countries. Meaning, NATO countries know that if they board a Russian boat, Russia will lose their minds. And same thing with Chinese boats. If the U.S. decided to have a blockade against Venezuela, China and Russia would lose their minds over it. Meaning it's force, that it's a hedge. How much work do you have to do? Would this lead to a larger conflict and a larger war? I agree with you on trade and those type of things. Fair enough. Agreed. Maybe I'm too loose with my words in saying there's no such thing as international law. But one last thing before I let you go. Lebanon. Netanyahu, it has been said, requires war to stay in power. And when the quote-unquote ceasefire took place, it allowed a lot of European leaders to be like, all right, well, this is done. War's over. And then they murdered 100 people. And they still say, hey, war's over. No issue. And now they have moved into Lebanon. Hezbollah, obviously, at some point is going to get involved. There's an expectation that the bombings are going to commence, or at the very least, an open war is going to break loose. This is the conversation for Laith, where Laith was like, he has an expectation that a full-blown war is going to break loose in the Middle East. And it's not going to be limited to Lebanon and Israel, that other forces are going to get involved. Give me a take on that. I mean, like this notion of Iraq troops, resistant groups getting involved, Yemen getting involved, even to the point of Iran getting involved in this. Do you see this kind of regional war in the way that it's being described?
If Israel and the United States governments felt unconstrained by public opinion, yes, I think it's inevitable. And when it comes to Lebanon, Netanyahu has a particular problem. And the particular problem that he has is that he was roundly criticized on a daily basis by people who live in the north of Israel during the war with Hezbollah, because their settlements were getting, the shit kicked out of them. One of them, probably the most, certainly two of I actually saw two of them repeatedly when I went to South Lebanon, Kiryat Shimona and Metula. I actually saw an attack on Metula by Hezbollah. I was with Laith in the south of Lebanon at the time, and they attacked it with some thermobaric weaponry. It was quite an attack. In any case, I think
You mean Hezbollah attacked with thermobaric weapons?
Metula is on a hill, and so on the very top of the hill, there's a military base, and then all around it, there's housing. And they didn't attack the civilian infrastructure. I didn't see that. They attacked the military base with thermobaric weapons.
Wow.
And so the people who live in that part of the genocidal entity understand perfectly well that as long as Hezbollah remains armed, and as long as Hezbollah has a presence in South Lebanon, which is to say south of Litani River, they could come under attack at any time, and to a devastating degree. So and Netanyahu has vowed to eliminate that threat. So it's clearly not eliminated. The Lebanese army ain't going to do it. That's now crystal clear. And so the only way for him to make good on his promise of security, and that's his big thing, I give security to the people of Israel, is to send the ground forces in there en masse again. And I think he'll want to do that. And quite apart from the fact that he has to deal with this threat, they want the resources of South Lebanon. They want access to the water of the Litani River. South Lebanon, if you've been there, it's a very advantageous place to defend because of the terrain. So he wants to deprive any resistance forces of access to that terrain. Now, the problem that he confronts, of course, is that there is a growing distaste for Israel and for its U.S.-backed, Western-backed wars of aggression in the region,
Yes.
in the United States, in Canada, in Western Europe. And I think that the opposition to Israel's aggression in the West is getting to the stage where this is becoming a problem for Netanyahu and Trump, particularly Trump, who's facing midterms next year. And the Republicans just had their asses handed to them in these elections that took place. I think the election of Mamdani, I'm not a big, I watch Lath and you talk about Mamdani, and I'm pretty much coming from the Lath school on this one. Okay.
Right.
I like Mamdani. I'm glad he won. He may turn out to be, an exceptional Democrat, but he's a Democrat, and I don't have a lot of hope that he's going to be transformational. But the fact that he won, saying that Israel's committing genocide and that he was going to order the police to arrest Netanyahu is a big deal. It's a big deal. And I think that's probably, spooked Trump and the people around Trump. And they don't want to lose control of the House and the Senate, in part because Trump's probably going to get impeached if that happens. Right. So there's this bubbling underneath. And this whole thing, I'm just amazed at the things that Candace Owens is saying. I can't believe it. I watch her now religiously just because it blows my mind that somebody on the right, I think she has now the largest podcast in the world.
She's huge. I don't know about the world. Joe Rogan's like insanely ridiculous.
Yeah. So there's a real political issue here about whether or not Trump and other Western governments, Starmer is like, my God, it's a public relations nightmare, the Starmer government in the UK. You can go on and on, the German government, which backs Israel. So do they feel that they have the latitude to continue to indulge Israel's aggressions? I don't know. They may have reached the point where they've had enough. So I think if Israel had its way, the short answer, if Israel had its way, oh yeah, we'd be into all-out war throughout the West Asia, and all of those resistance groups would participate. The question is going to be whether Western elites feel that they have the latitude to indulge Israel again. I don't know.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Basically, the pressure that Western governments were coming under and their association either with defending Netanyahu or at the very least being neutral, quote unquote. I mean, I don't know how you be neutral in a genocide. The very act of neutrality on some level emboldens the genocide. But that this is a political issue. I mean, and it's not just Candace. I mean, Tucker Carlson. What's the other one? Nick Fuentes. Like all of these people on the right, and all of these people have taken serious issue with this idea of make Israel great, as opposed to make America great. No, I agree with you. I mean, some people have even argued that there's a war on the right on this particular issue, where it's splitting the right. I don't know what that looks like electorally, but I agree with you that Trump has a problem in regards to his electoral chances, or at the very least, in the midterms and whatnot. Agreed, 1,000% agreed. So, okay, fair enough. So the other group's going to get involved. Netanyahu, almost on some level, needs a war in order to keep this effectively going. They have initiated, I guess, these areas that they were apparently going to bomb, or apparently they were going to attack. They've initiated a few attacks, but they've been doing attacks for the entirety of the quote unquote ceasefire with Lebanon in and of itself. Elections are coming up next year. Is there a chance? Hezbollah put out a letter where they were calling for the unification of Lebanon, basically unification of Hezbollah and of the military. Up to this point, the Lebanese military has been hard pressed to fire a bullet in anger. But if indeed they get new leadership in, do you see, or do you ever foresee this organized, this unified front and pushing back against Israel with the political entity itself and Hezbollah, if they get the correct person, or if they get a certain leader, let's say, in power in Lebanon in the next elections, or that's not so much?
Unlikely, but I don't think you can exclude that possibility. I mean, Israel has basically been bombing the bejesus out of Lebanon every day since that ceasefire came into effect.
Yes.
And, Hezbollah has restrained itself. I don't think there's been a single retaliation. It's remarkable. And the whole time, the Lebanese government has not lifted a finger. This is extremely damaging to the credibility of this government. And people in the country, I think, who aren't necessarily fans of Hezbollah are becoming increasingly irate with the government for doing nothing. And I think this is reflected in the statements of Michel Aoun, right, who said, ordered the Lebanese army to confront the Israeli military. So based on history, one is skeptical, but the situation is becoming rather extreme for the government. And I think the government may have no alternative but to at least put up some level of resistance. Let's be clear, though, they don't have the capacity to do what Hezbollah can do. They don't have the weapons that Hezbollah has. I don't think they have the determination and the combat experience that Hezbollah has. So if there's going to be a defense of Lebanese sovereignty, it's going to be led by Hezbollah and its ally Amal, and not by the Lebanese army.
Dimitri, you're an awesome guest. Thank you for indulging me in my, I guess, bitching about international law.
I understand the skepticism, Jamal. I mean, I totally get it. I know people are very down on international law right now. I just hope people don't give up on it. We need it.
I just don't know how that works. I'm just at a loss for how it works. It's one thing if you had a world government, and if you had okay, so you have this entity over top of other states, but in that case, there is no such thing as hegemon in that context. There is no such thing as these larger states with these massive militaries that can effectively do what they will. How would you ever go after the U.S. in real terms? Meaning George Bush invaded a country, killed millions, or got 1 million people killed, initiated a war that is still being fought now, that is led effectively to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, all of these groups, many of which we paid, and now to the overthrow of Syria, something that we've been working on for all of these years. And I'm not trying to go back into the argument. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm asking a different question.
Yeah.
How do you ever deal with not even a hegemon, but how would you ever even deal with Russia if Russia went rogue or if China went rogue?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you do it. And so it's okay, so how's the international law if there are, let's say at the very least 3 countries that can effectively do what they will? I don't know an answer to.
Military intervention is only one of the tools available to the UN Security Council. It also can impose economic sanctions. So,
that's true.
And one may argue that, these countries are largely immune from sanctions. I don't think that's true. I think that you can inflict pain on any country in the world if there's enough international consensus for the imposition and enforcement of sanctions. But also you could take limited military actions. So I don't want to, cut into your next guest's time, but just quickly, let's imagine that the UN Security Council somehow overcame, the US veto or didn't have to deal with the veto power of the United States. And they were just confronted with a practical problem of how can we intervene militarily to protect the Palestinians? Well, they could have assembled an armada to go deliver humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, not to attack U.S. forces or Israeli forces. And they could have said, we don't want to fight. We're just going in there with humanitarian aid, and we're going to set up humanitarian distribution points. If you attack us, we'll defend ourselves, but we aren't going to attack you. Would the United States have attacked an armada Israel that included ships from the Russian Federation and from the People's Republic of China and Turkey? I don't know. I think you might have found out that there ain't a lot of willingness on their side to take on a real adversary directly.
Yeah.
It would have been risky. I can't say that it wouldn't have ended up in a war, even a nuclear war, but I think that probably they would not have attacked the armada.
It's the probably part. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, this is the same logic that the Brits and the Europeans use. Yeah, Putin is showing these weapons, the Brezhnevik and the Poseidon and the Sarmat and the Rezhnik and the Kimsals, but he's not going to use them against us. That's their argument, right? We can put troops in Ukraine. He's not going to attack our troops. Yeah, okay. I hear you. I hear you, right? I agree with you, though. I think the U.S. would have been hard-pressed to come up with a justification to bomb a boat from those countries. But God, man, you have lunatics who are in power sometimes. So I don't know. Dimitri, man, I've enjoyed this conversation. I really have. Thank you for this, honestly. Dimitri, runs the show Reason to Resist on YouTube. Check him out. When is your next show going to be, by the way, just so the audience would know?
I'm actually late for an interview of Laith Maroof right now, so I've got to. We'll publish that later today. So
I am so sorry. You should have told me. I'm sorry.
Laith will understand. So
Okay. Dimitri is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Definitely check out his show. Dimitri, you are awesome, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
always a pleasure.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. We have come to the end. We have come to the end. Let's see. I have a super chat. Mom Donnie, the Democrat, do we agree voting in the United States and Europe nowadays is a bit like writing a letter to Santa Claus? Can hopium turn into revolt? Oh, that is a good question. That is such a good question. I think the better question may be, can one man with the backing of millions make a difference? That may be a better question. Let's say, because I agree with you, right? Because voting for one guy, well, one guy doesn't entirely make policy. That guy is dependent upon other people, especially, what's taking place in New York and everything else, who can damage or at the very least injure his capability of making whatever change. Let's assume he wants to make change. Let's assume for the moment, though, let's take a non-cynical point of view and assume that he means everything he said. Let's assume it. Mamdani got more votes, from my understanding, than pretty much anybody else in modern history running for mayor in New York. Those people clearly want something different. Like, meaning, put everything else to the side. You get a public that is engaged and that wants something fundamentally different than what the public has been getting. And when you're paying $5,000 for rent, when you're paying increased costs for groceries, increased costs for electricity, 2 to 3 times more for healthcare. Okay, well, you have a population that is under a pain point. And the catch becomes, has that pain point become enough where the population gets more engaged in the political affairs, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to hand it off to some rando guy and let that guy do the job? Can a population that's pissed off and engaged, can they make a difference? I think it's the question, as opposed to, can one guy make that difference? Because I'm not a believer of one guy. I am believing of movements and crowds and groups and people who are in pain trying to get out of their pain. It's like if you had a back issue, and in the context of that back issue, you're like, all right, it's not that bad. Like, I'll give you an example. My TMJ has been slipping out of joint. And it's like, okay, that sucks. When it happens, push it back in and you go about your way. What happens if you can't push it back in? Right? Like, you're at a pain point that you no longer can deal with on your own, in which case you may go to somewhere in order to try to fix the fact that you can't fix it on your own. Meaning, what is the pain point in the United States where the public stop being anesthetized and actually gets engaged? When I'm making the argument of going to the doctor, I mean effectively getting more politically engaged, getting pissed off, raiding the Capitol in a real sense for actual real issues. When does that happen? I have no idea when that happens. You can make an argument that the voting for Mamdani, socialist, Muslim, I don't like to use his attributes, but everybody else uses his attributes as an anomaly, so I'll go with it. When you get people coming out and voting on that level, you have a crowd that is pissed off and wants something radically different. Does a crowd allow him to do what he wants to do? That's assuming he's being legit in what he wants to do. I don't know. That's a question. I have no idea. I have no idea. I do think you do hit a pain point where the public gets engaged, the public gets pissed off. America has been very anesthetized, so I don't know what that pain point is. People are paying 3 and 4 times more for healthcare. You think that's a pain point. The president of the United States is effectively saying, hey, don't give people food stamps. And if you do, we're going to make it hurt. Okay, that's a pain point. People not eating, babies not eating, right? At some point, it will be Social Security. You already have airlines that are going to be cutting flights on Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's assuming the government stays closed. people losing their jobs, the richest man on the planet going in and firing a bunch of federal workers. What's the pain point where the public flips out? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Fei Lu, I saw your tweet or your chat. Yes, Mamadani. Is that mine? That's Mom, M-A-M. Look, I covered Russian politics for Sputnik. Well, let's say international politics. I didn't really get into domestic affairs. But to be fair, it wasn't just Russian, it was world politics. Russia, China, India, Brazil, any rando thing that happens pretty much anywhere in the world, the Sudanese war, Ethiopian war. Our job was to cover all that stuff. We had people on the ground, like my co-host from F6 was actually on the ground covering the Ethiopian war. I was sent to all locations around the planet in order to cover various events that were taking place in all of those countries. I cover world affairs. I don't have a dog in the hunt. I'm a man on the moon looking at events. And even though I may agree with the position, so I think the Russian position is correct, for example. I think the Chinese position in the way that they operate in the world is more correct. I think the Iranian position, basically leave us the F alone and we were going to defend our sovereignty, is more correct. The Western position of aggression, I do not think is correct. Using Israel as a proxy, I don't think is correct. Meaning, yes, I have a point of view just based on my value set, but I am a man on the moon looking at events. I don't have a dog in this hunt. If Russia went rogue, I would be like, whoa, what the F are they doing? That makes me less hireable, potentially. Fair enough. And I'm saying that because this stuff is based on a value set. All countries can be held to criticism. All. This idea that you have this pristine vase that you're keeping countries in is nonsense. If we saw Nazis being funded by various countries, we would be outraged by it. Oh my God, how are you funding the Nazis? How are you doing that? That's outrageous, right? How are you funding Hitler's war machine? How are you giving money to people who are turning Jews into shoes and leather? How are you getting money to people who are putting people in ovens? We would take radical issue with something like that. So when we are looking at countries, and all of these countries have effectively maintained their relationships with modern day Nazis for all intents and purposes, in the way that they operate, the way that they think, the way that they act, the things that they do. Why wouldn't we take issue with it? Just because a country is defending its sovereignty, and just because a country in the context of defending its sovereignty is making an argument in the world that I agree with, of look, people, countries need to be have their sovereignty. We need to not to invade. We need to be anti-imperialists, especially in our context. We need to foster international law, international relations, etc. All of that stuff is correct. Agreed. But making a strongly worded speech and then continuing to be the largest supplier, short of Europe, is incongruous. You can disagree with the take, but I'm saying it's a bit weird. Hey, I don't like the fact that you're murdering hundreds of thousands of people. I don't like the fact that you're raping people in prison. I don't like the fact that the overwhelming majority of your society is okay with you raping people in prison. I don't like you torturing, starving people to death. We don't like that. That's impolite to us. By the way, your trade package will be there in a few days. Those things that's weird. It's bizarre. A strongly worded statement while simultaneously ultimately supporting a regime that is doing this, that is murdering people daily, is a bit weird. That's all. So, I you can take issue with that. I don't know why you would take issue with that. It looks like you would take issue with the fact that they're still supplying, or the largest trading partner to Israel. It's like, hey man, we don't like what you're doing, but we got a business deal to make. I don't know. I'm just saying it's a bit weird. And people who point that out are not, like, meaning you can have 2 points of view simultaneously. A, this point of view that, yeah, China is a force for good in the world in the way that they operate. But B, China is a realist government that is also going to make decisions and choices that are ultimately in their best interests. These things don't conflict. Both can be true. And whereas one, hey, you like, the other one, you may like less so. So, Faye, I understand where you're coming from, but I think you're wrong on this. I think you're wrong on this one. Western empires have been lying, demonizing, and oppressing China. I am not demonizing China. You have zero right to criticize China. Know your place. You are out of your effing mind, Faye. You're out of your effing mind. You are out of your mind. You are out of your mind. You are out of your mind. You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. You've lost it. You've lost it. You've lost it. I'm sorry, Faye. You've lost it on this one. No, I think you are very biased in your take. And you're acting as if a country that is a realist country that is looking out for their best interests is something special and unique. As a 1.4 billion people, okay, that may be unique. They have a heavy industrial base, that may be unique. True. But it's still a country, and countries can be criticized for policy. So, it's just, yeah. I'm biased. Okay, I'm biased. I cover China content constantly. Yeah, I think you're wrong. Obviously, I think you're wrong. All right. I am going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Faye, I would love to visit China. I would love to visit all of the people that I know that's in the country itself. If you think that human beings, because human beings are ultimately the ones that are running countries, that they are magical things, that they are functioning with an ideology, especially in our current time frame, that self-interest is not built into it, then you're getting this wrong. China's self-interest in this moment aligns with my wants in the context of a larger world that is not under this yoke of Western attempted domination. So let's be clear on priorities on this. I don't have a special view of any of these countries. They're just countries. They have objectives. They have things that they want to accomplish. And either those things that they want to accomplish align with me or they don't. China, Russia, India, this idea of having a global order that is not dominated by a single entity that is invading, killing, etc., is within my wants. Various countries around the globe assist in accomplishing those wants. It doesn't make them perfect entities. No human being is a perfect entity. And countries who are made up of human beings, by definition, are also not going to be perfect entities. If you think that's true, then you're getting this wrong. And your point of view of it is going to be skewed if you do indeed think that this country is a perfect entity. It's good. I think what it's doing is good. It's a benefit to humanity in the way that it operates currently. And you may say part of that is altruistic. I would argue part of it is realist. So, yeah, I think you're getting this wrong. All right. I am going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. You can support this content. PayPal, Patreon. China doesn't think you hear them. Dude. Look, just because this feels like the anti-Semitic stuff to me. Just because you have some people who are racist doesn't mean that everybody who criticizes you is racist. Does that make sense? The cop that's being a dick to you may not be racist. He just may be a dick in general. If that makes sense. I'm not being a dick to China on this. I'm just pointing out you have to be realistic in the way that you look at these countries. They're not magical things. So, all right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I want to thank all of you, all of my guests. Carl is fantastic. Mark is awesome. Dimitri, fantastic also. We've had a damn good show today. We had a damn good crowd today. I think we hit over 1,000 today, almost the entire way through. And so you guys have my thanks. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? Like, share, subscribe. You can support PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, buy me a coffee. I think I said PayPal already. Memberships. All of those things help the show. All of those things helps keep this content going. As I've said before, I would like to get a producer. And I require your help to do so because we got to grow in order to make that work. But nevertheless, we move on. I'm trying to think, who do we have for tomorrow? Hopefully I have Warwick. I think I can get him in the morning. Sabrina is going to be on the show. Sabby Sabs. She's going to be on tomorrow. So is somebody else. Sabrina. Oh, Esteban Carrillo. I've learned to roll my R's. Esteban Carrillo. He will be on the show tomorrow also. I may need one other guest to round it out. I think Sabrina is going to be on at 9. So I may need somebody for 9:30. But either way, much of the show is set up for tomorrow. So I will see you bright and early in the morning. You guys have a fantastic rest of your day. You be safe, be kind to the degree that you can be kind. It's not always about money. Matt Leo, it's not always about money. It can't be always about money. I'll tell you an example from here. I ran into an emergency last week. So, as you all know, when I go to a location, I have to get treatments in each location. And so one of the most complicated aspects of traveling for me is, where do I find a clinic to get dialysis? Got to find it. Had a clinic, lost the clinic. So then there's this emergency. Okay, I got to find a place. My response was, okay, well, F it. I'm going to leave my apartment and I'm going to go to Pokhara because there's a hospital there that I know of that I can get treatments. That would have incurred a massive cost to do it. But again, you don't have a choice. It's something you have to do. Also, I've been screwing up because I didn't realize that rice was 70% water. So that doesn't help. My host comes down and he's like, hey, why don't you go to this other place? And he sends me to a hospital. From that, I go to another one and I find it. And he comes down and he tells me, he says, dude, the hospital that you were going to, people have been dying at that hospital. I was like, what? He says, nobody goes to that hospital. Now, obviously, people go to the hospital. It's a government hospital. And I've seen no issue with government hospitals in locations that I go to. But he was very strong, like, dude, that is a bad idea. Don't do that. Don't do that. As I pointed out to him, paying, let's say, $40 a month for treatment is a hell of a lot different than paying, let's say, $80. Now, this kind of goes to the whole thing about money, right? If you find out that one guy can do a surgery for $30, I'll give you an example. When I was in Nepal 18 years ago, I was reading this thing about transplants and cost of transplants. And it was like, well, India can do a transplant for, I don't know, $20,000, whatever the money is. And Nepal was like, well, we could do it for 5. Now, is that true? Maybe. Maybe it could be just as proficient. Maybe everything goes fine. But doesn't money have some corollary to capability at times? Sometimes. Depends. Moving beyond the surgery thing, for example, let's go to a real world phenomena instance. Industry. So from my point of view, security is paramount in regards to countries. What that means is control of your energy, control of your roads, control of your transportation roads, fair enough. Let's put those together. Control of natural resources, meaning control of industry. And I don't mean the fact that the government is controlling industry directly. I just mean that if you need to pay more to have industry located in your country, then you do that because that's a vital interest. If you are ever in a war, you will need that industry to fight that war. And even beyond being in a war, just for domestic consumption and domestic items, you need that industry. So if you need a situation where you're building ships, bridges, boats, add in whatever random thing, then those are things that you need to keep. America's industrial capacity was astonishing after the Second World War. To give that up over this idea of where it's cheaper to just send it to some other country. Okay, those are American workers that no longer have jobs. Those are capability that you no longer have at your disposal. And now that you're in a pissing match with China, you're going to miss that industry and you're going to miss that capacity because China has it in spades. Like, there are things that you do need to put money up for. Healthcare is an example. Having a healthy population is important. If you need to spend money to ensure that you have a healthy population, then that is the responsibility of the government to do it because the government is made up of those people, and all things being equal, you want those people to be healthy. Like, it's not about always saving money. It's not always about money. Sometimes it's about things that money buys. I mean, money is just an allegory for whatever you can do with it, right? So, all right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. I'm going to say be kind to the degree that you can be kind. And I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all.